Good morning and welcome to the 6th Annual Northwest Citizen Corps Leadership Summit. This year, we are offering the event in a virtual format, and I hope that you will find it a good use of your time. We will start the event with a land acknowledgement. While there is no official mandate to do so, it reminds us that we live in a history-driven present. Land acknowledgements remind us to be intentional in our relations with the land and with the people indigenous to the land. Every community owes its existence and vitality to generations from around the world who contributed their hopes, dreams, and energy to making the history that led to this moment. Some were brought here against their will. Some were drawn to leave their distant homes in hope of a better life, and some have lived on this land for more generations than can be counted. Truth and acknowledgement are critical to building mutual respect and connection across all barriers of heritage. I am coordinating this event from Olympia on the traditional territories of the Coast Salish people, specifically the Nisqually and Squaxin Island peoples. Olympia and the South Puget Sound region are covered by the Treaty of Medicine Creek, signed under duress in 1854. We are guided by the Centennial Accord and Chapter 43-376 RCW, respecting and affirming tribal sovereignty and working with our tribal governments throughout the state government to government partnership. Please take a moment to consider the many legacies of violence, displacement, migration, and settlement that bring us together here today. Now I'd like to introduce Andy Burrows, the Citizen Responder Lead of FEMA Individual and Community Preparedness. He will provide the event welcome.
Hi, Paula. Thank you for having me. My name is Andy Burrows, coming at you live from scenic, sunny Northern Virginia, a suburb of Washington, D.C. I am part of the Individual and Community Preparedness Division at FEMA headquarters. And among my responsibilities are the CERT program and then also Citizen Corps, which is largely run at the FEMA regional level now. I want to thank you for having me, and I'm very grateful for the opportunity to welcome you to this event. I would just like to say that we are starting to learn a great deal about the contributions of CERT and also Citizen Corps this year. In the past couple of weeks, we have been running a campaign to learn more about the contributions of CERT and Citizen Corps to preparedness in the United States. And that has taken the form of a campaign to verify program listings in the Citizen Responder website. And in that time, we've had only 89 programs verify their listings. But what have we learned? We have learned that 89 CERT programs across the country, across the whole country, 89 of several thousand listings, serve 27 million Americans. They have trained 10,487 people this year to some degree, including CERT basic training. And they have volunteered 21,000 hours towards COVID relief, towards local readiness exercises, any number of volunteer activities. These are some pretty impressive numbers for a verification campaign that's only beginning. And it is a testament to the strength of volunteerism in this country and volunteerism in the Pacific Northwest, which includes some of those programs. So I want to thank all of you at the federal, state, and local level for your contributions to moving the needle of preparedness in the United States. And Citizen Corps in the Pacific Northwest is the most active location for Citizen Corps in the country. As you know, in some places it's stronger than others, and you are the heart of it. So thank you for that, and thank you for your contributions, and thank you for organizing your friends, neighbors, and communities to be prepared and do great things for the United States in preparedness. So again, 27 million people served, and that's only 89 programs that have updated their profile. So my appeal to you is to please log into the CERT registration site and update your program profile so we can get more information like this. And the next time I get to meet you, I can actually come back and say exactly what CERT and Citizen Corps have done in each state and city in the country. So thank you for the opportunity to be here, and I hope that gives you a sense of where we are with preparedness. Thank you, Paula.
Thank you, Andy, for your welcome to our summit and your updates on the Citizen Corps CERT, Citizen Corps CERT world at the national level. Hopefully all the CERT program managers who are attending will go to the website and complete the certification of their programs. I appreciate the time that out of your busy day to support our event. Thank you. As you can see, we have a fairly tight agenda for the day. We are going to offer our presenters and panelists the opportunity to finish their section prior to answering questions. We ask that you write your questions in the chat box, and we will answer from there when each presentation is done. First panel consists of leaders of CERT Washington, the American Red Cross, CERT Mason County, and the Medical Reserve Corps. They will be discussing the different types of changes and accommodations that their programs had to make during the past year in response to the COVID-19 pandemic. Our first panelist, one of our first panelists, Adrienne Gillis from the North American Red Cross, was unable to make it today because of a family emergency. However, she did provide a copy of her responses. Jan Bromberg, one of our awesome planning committee members and an overall jack of all trades, has agreed to read Adrienne's responses. Jan is also an American Red Cross volunteer. Please welcome Amber Martignon, Jan Bromberg, Celso Rangel, and Moji Obiako. My first request for the panelists is that you please identify what your position is in the organization you represent. So when I ask the first question, if you'll start by introducing yourself and telling us what you do, that will be great. All righty, question number one. COVID-19 created a huge need to adapt the way programs operate. What were some of the roadblocks that you encountered in adapting? I'll start with Amber.
Thanks, Paula. That's a great question. So I am Amber Martignon. I'm the Executive Director of CERT Washington. And CERT Washington oversees AmeriCorps programs across the state, but it also houses the CERT program. And Paula is one of the CERT Washington team members. And so I'm just really excited to be here and to talk to you about different areas of CERT Washington's work around volunteer engagement. But one of the kind of important things when we're talking about how we had to adapt the way that programs operate is that we, as CERT Washington, don't directly oversee volunteers. Instead, we're supporting a series of organizations, whether they are AmeriCorps programs or CERT programs, or even community-based programs that are engaging volunteers. And so one of the challenges that we really saw that we had to work through were things like federal policies and the rules around what national service or volunteerism looks like, broadband access, general uncertainty around the health pandemic and what safety precautions need to take place. And so we found ourselves in this position of interpreting and making sure that the Department of Health guidance and other guidance got out to our different partners so that they could pivot or think about what pivoting made the most sense for their program. I think there were also real challenges when you're used to operating in person to think about what does it mean to operate virtually. And there were phenomenal examples of learning across the state through volunteer programs, through AmeriCorps programs, and through CERT programs, where the leadership within those organizations really learned new skills. And I think that was a high point of this entire experience, not so much a challenge. I mean, it was a challenge in that they had to respond, but they showed that they could respond and in fact did just a phenomenal job in that case.
So what she said is many of our volunteers are older and have had enormous challenges adapting to technology for virtual meetings. We need to utilize team meetings to facilitate meetings, trainings, and orientations, and larger response team communication. That was her answer.
Okay, great. Thank you. Celso.
Celso Rangel. I'm the CERT Mason County program manager. We had several roadblocks that we encountered. Number one, most of our CERT members are retirees and I don't want to say elderly, but they're up there in age. And a lot of them didn't have the modern day technology to be able to do internet or Zoom or anything with them. But we did have to adapt. Um, Another roadblock that we encountered was getting and receiving PPE for all volunteers. We asked them to do certain things for us, and of course, at the start of the pandemic, most of the items on hand were limited, especially in store shelves. Um, we also had to adapt our in classroom because we still wanted to keep up with training. An example would be our CPR first aid classes, where we went from doing a renewal for 4 hours and redoing 25 people at a time. We went to online classes and then having them schedule an hour where they can come in and do hands-on at a safe distance and still maintaining the CDC guidelines for safety and pandemic protocols. But those are a few of the roadblocks that we encountered here in Mason County. Thank you.
Thank you, Celso. Okay, Moji.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Moji Obiako, and my role with the MRC program is to serve as the Region 10 liaison. So I provide technical assistance and support to MRC units throughout Region 10, which is Alaska, Idaho, Oregon, and Washington, and as well as provide direct program support to connect unit leaders and state coordinators. So while I'm not a direct unit leader for MRC units, I have been previously in previous roles. So I do understand the nuances at both the local unit leader and a state unit leader, state MRC level, though I'm serving as a regional liaison currently. In terms of roadblocks, I first want to just start off with just saying our MRC program, as we've kind of evaluated things so far, what we consider ourselves is a network created for this moment. So we feel like over the past 19 years, our network has grown, not only in our total number of volunteers, but also our collective response experience and capabilities. So for example, in 2009, our volunteers responded to H1N1. And so although COVID-19 is novel and it's the greatest public health crisis since the flu pandemic, we do feel like we were created for this challenge. And so as a result, we have units that have been responding, and we have donated over 1 million hours so far to this pandemic. But of course, we know there's challenges and there are things that we ran into, the roadblocks per se. And what we saw prominently were definitely steep learning curves with transitioning to the online platform and volunteer groups using this online platform more so than in any time in the past. We also saw that units were struggling to just really rapidly onboard the large number of volunteers. And you'll hear about some of those numbers later on, I'm sure, as we address other questions. But then another concern was just really liability, making sure volunteers had adequate liability. And then background checks was a concern, and credentialing our health volunteers, making sure that they were pre-credentialed and able to adequately support the missions that MRC volunteers were being engaged in. So those would be some of our roadblocks. Thank you.
Thank you, Moji. Appreciate that. Question number 2. What impact did it have on your ability to recruit for your program? I'll start with Jan, then Celso, then Moji, and finally Amber.
In the Red Cross, our ability to recruit was severely impacted the first 12 months due to unknowns of how to meet and greet and orient new volunteers. I think less new volunteers were inquiring about volunteer opportunities initially during COVID as well. I do know that we had a very strong volunteer engagement group that was able to, and I'm speaking for myself at this point, that was able to reach out, and there were several new volunteers that started because of COVID, because they were sitting home with nothing to do when we went virtual on presentations. So I'm just adding that in as a volunteer who participates in our team meetings. But I do know that it was very difficult in the very beginning, and it took a while. It took probably somewhere in the neighborhood of 6 months or so before before we were able to go so virtually that we could get more people, and training and everything else had to be done virtually. All of the uh, classes that we normally do in person for training had to be set up virtually. So that was, it made it difficult. Okay, I'll pass this on to Celso.
Okay. So impact on recruitment. Our CERT leaders within our community reached out to us, and their groups were volunteering for whatever we needed them to do. Of course, the impact of recruitment is that we had no public gatherings to set up recruitment booths and interact with the public for potential classes. Uh, we in Mason County have a lot of small towns that have a lot of fairs and stuff, and we rely a lot on that. But we weren't able to do that this year. But seeing team members in uniform, and our uniform consists of the CERT vest and the CERT our hard hat. Seeing team members in their uniform sparked interest with people who were coming to our food banks and to other functions, asking how they can volunteer and how they can get involved with CERT. And so that to me was a prime example that pandemics have no boundaries, that you can make the best of it, whether you're at home or you're at work.
Right. So for us, as I've mentioned previously, our numbers have grown almost exponentially. So before the pandemic, we started at close to 200,000 volunteers, probably around the 180 mark. And now we're at like 272,000 volunteers. So that's how our numbers have grown since the start of COVID. So small units have literally tripled, quadrupled in size. And so really for the MRC, what we're seeing is that unit leaders are having trouble just managing that large influx of volunteers. So the word has spread. Community members have stepped up as we expected them to do. They said, here I am, I'm ready to volunteer. They've contacted so many various forms. And of course, because it's a public health emergency, again, our MRC program has been trained for this response. So a lot of units have been responding. And because of that, local community members are interested in engaging with those units. So yes, it's been a lot of volunteers just wanting to be engaged. And we're hoping to be able to utilize that as we transition to recovery to really get volunteers to continue to be engaged.
Yeah, so just jumping in, I think, on what you said, because I think it's my turn, Paula, right? I think everyone who spoke kind of showed that mixed bag of some organizations really struggled with recruitment and other organizations had a huge influx. Our AmeriCorps programs that ended up leading some of the food insecurity response in communities had unprecedented applications from primarily young people who wanted to serve. Our programs that I think were more school-based struggled, but they also struggled with figuring out what that recruitment platform looks like when they were used to using school fairs or outreach tables or those more traditional volunteer recruitment mechanisms. While we were responding to COVID as a state commission, we were also recognizing that we had unprecedented unemployment. And in some parts of Washington, our unemployment rates for youth, BIPOC youth in particular, were 3 times what it was anywhere else. And so this was an opportunity for us to really think about how do you engage different communities in being part of the solution. And so it was challenging. It was also really exciting.
Thank you. Very thoughtful question, or thoughtful responses to that. Our third question: what are a couple of best practices that you adopted along the way that you will continue to use going forward? We'll start this one with Celso, then Moji, then Amber, and finally Jan.
I'm talking expanding our stakeholders within the community. Local breweries, even though the pandemic alcohol sales went up a lot, our local breweries here within our region stopped making alcohol and started making hand sanitizer, which was very first at the start of the pandemic. We are creatures of habit, so we like to shop Costco and buy stuff out of bulk. In this case, Costco even ran out. So expanding our stakeholders with our local Walmart, Fred Meyer, Lowe's, and Home Depot, and being able to order stuff through them, even though it might not be a lot, but it would be enough to help put a dent in it. Right now, having our CERT helping out at food banks. Right now, they're helping out with traffic control and crowd control, which, by the way, is an advanced course here in Mason County as part of CERT. And because they're able to do that, it ties up or it frees up local law enforcement and local fire department personnel to be able to do other jobs within the community. So, being able to expand our outside the box type scenario for future incidents and crises and pandemics. I think that's what we're walking away with. Thank you.
Clear? All right, so for the MRC program, for best practices, so some of our common MRC missions in response to this pandemic have included community screening and testing operations, COVID-19 vaccine administration, medical surge support at long-term care facilities, alternate care sites, patient case and contact investigations. We've really seen call center operations just really explode, and the level of detail and the elaborate operations that MRC units will be able to provide. Even community education and outreach, for example, assisting elderly and vulnerable community members with well check calls, food distribution errands, and medication pickup and logistics support, anything from inventory, packaging, and distributing PPE. So we've seen units really engage and step up in numerous ways to support the COVID response. I think in terms of takeaways and best practices, we've really seen our units find innovative ways to rise and meet the challenge. We've seen them track and manage volunteers in ways that they haven't done before, really relying on volunteer management systems and electronic platforms that we feel can be utilized going forward. Additionally, we see that virtual meetings and trainings allow us to see each other more often. And so we're like, hey, why weren't we doing this before? We can have a Zoom meeting and turn on our cameras and be able to see each other before that face-to-face meeting. So I see that as a best practice going forward. And that also allows us to leverage resources when you can have a training and you can invite several MRC leaders from across the network to participate with you. You're able to really leverage your resources. So I see that too as a best practice going forward. Again, it's kind of one of those things like, why weren't we doing this previously? I think we really put a lot of weight on the face-to-face meetings, which we definitely should still do as we can as things get, safer, and it's something that we can move towards. But we also see the value in being able to meet and connect virtually as well. So we've seen MRC units really, again, just adapt, as we talked about in question one. And so I think a lot of those adaptations we'll see going forward for MRC unit leaders that they can really use to make their units and unit management more efficient, is what I see overall.
I think most of my talking points would echo what's been said so far. We learned that we need to create partnerships with non-traditional partners. I mean, we need to do that both within and outside of emergencies. We see real value in what virtual can do, but also still acknowledge that in-person is important. And so, learning how to use virtual better and do it in a way that does make what we do accessible across the state as a statewide entity is really important. Also finding ways to meet locally is really important. And so I think we still have some learning there. I think one of my, what I'm going to call a best practice, and maybe it fits here, maybe it doesn't, But what we really learned, whether you're an AmeriCorps program or whether you're a CERT program, that local connection with community, I hear my music coming. It's what actually helped us respond in across the state. It wasn't about whether you're an AmeriCorps program or whether you're a CERT program or whether you're a Medical Reserve Corps. I'll say that, although I'm less familiar with that one. I got more to learn. It was about how are you rooted in community and who do you know and where are those connections for you to be responsive? And I think that's a really big learning for us as a state agency, for us as emergency supporters, in terms of how do we better connect and support the work that CERT's doing and the work that those AmeriCorps programs are doing. Because I was constantly surprised with what I thought CERT did or what I thought AmeriCorps could do and what programs actually showed up and did. And I don't want to lose sight of that and what that means for the future.
So Adrian has written that we will continue to utilize Teams for our meetings, training, and orientations. And also for the coordination of larger responses, utilizing remote work tools is now a part of our training and orientation for new volunteers. We will assign mentors to the new volunteers for the first few months to help ease any challenges or hurdles in adapting to remote work technology. Little mini PowerPoints can illustrate how to get started on using some of the technology needed to get up and working remotely. I know that we had a technology expert volunteer, a Red Cross volunteer, and on Tuesdays she does tech hour, and every volunteer that was having any kind of technology issues has been utilizing this, and we're going forward using all of these new technologies, Teams, trainings by virtual, presentations by virtual, and it worked out in many, many ways. So those were the best practices that we had to switch to, and because they're working, they're going to continue along with in person, as everyone has mentioned, because we do like to get in front of people. Thank you.
All righty, our final question is, what are some lessons learned that you would like to share with other program leaders? Moji, let's start with you, then Amber, then Jan, and finally Celso.
All right. So for lessons learned, I think they center around some big topic areas for us. This is just speaking my experience on behalf of not on behalf of the program, but just what I see, the common trends that I've seen and heard from other MRC unit leaders. So I feel like we as a larger program probably need to really re-examine some of our issues and develop nationwide solutions to legal protections, background checks, workers' comp, and marketing. I feel like those are some big buckets that we kept hearing from unit leaders that they were wanting more from the National Program Office to really help support them in those areas. So again, that's legal protections, background checks, workers' comp, and marketing. The other thing is I feel like we needed to, lessons learned, just really reestablish some partnerships. So we had some great partnerships going in, but maybe we need to reestablish some of those partnerships, before the next big thing. That might be something really helpful for us to do as a program. And I would encourage that for sure during blue sky times. And then the last thing, volunteer recognition has really been huge for us. We hear from unit leaders all the time that they want ways to recognize their volunteers. And by ways, they mean money. And by money, they mean things that they can spend on. And for us, there's a lot of roadblocks being a program that's supported by the federal government and things that we can purchase and cannot purchase to recognize volunteers. And so they're asking us to jump through their hoops and really find ways around that so that we can recognize the volunteers are doing obviously fantastic work when we have over 1 million hours already during this COVID response. So, and we feel their pain. We know that this is something that's really important, especially for morale and for just really acknowledgement of the volunteers. But we do recognize we have roadblocks at the federal level to be able to do some of the things that they're asking us to do. We were able to design a challenge coin for them that unit leaders can and then take and develop on their own, but they would really like to see a more robust volunteer recognition effort on our part. So those are some key lessons learned. We would definitely want to be able to recognize volunteers. We want to be able to provide those system and structure things for MRC unit leaders and volunteers as they continue to navigate and move forward. So I will turn it over to Amber.
Thanks. I think at Serve Washington, we really believe that national service members and volunteer groups and CERT programs are essential in times of disaster and in times that aren't disaster. And we saw that some of those essential partners didn't have continuity plans and didn't really have maybe buy-in at a leadership level of what that looked like for deploying those volunteers during a disaster like COVID. Now, we can plan for all sorts of disasters, and I think there's a difference in how you respond to an earthquake and how you respond to a health pandemic, and I think there was just some unsettling there. But we really have some lessons to learn from this on how we can do better next time. I also think it echoes the things that were just said. Lots of questions around what does it mean to be essential? How do I protect my volunteers and my members? And what is my liability? And so those are things as a state we probably need to think a little bit more about. And then it's really hard to build partnerships when you're in the middle of responding with new organizations and have them understand what resources we can bring to the table. And so that means we got to do some partnership development when we're not in the middle of responding to COVID, and make sure that continues to be a priority for our organization. And I don't remember who I'm supposed to hand it off to, so hopefully you remember who you are.
Yeah, it's me, Jan. So I am reading Adrienne Gillis's response to this question. And her words are, we learned a lot, not all of our volunteers could adapt. Some due to the technology issues and some due to missing the in-person social aspect of previous volunteer time. But moving forward, we will be teaching technology for remote working up front. We have technology question, answer, and assistance for 1 hour twice a week to assist volunteers in getting a handle on any technological related volunteering or remote work issues. And this has helped a lot. That's the extent of her answers. So I guess I'm passing this back on to Paula at this point, or Celso?
Also,
Thank you.
yes. So lessons learned. What I would pass on to program leaders. I know none of us get frustrated at work, especially when we do training. But lessons learned. I've seen it time and time again. We are truly Washington strong. When the need goes out for volunteers, CERT has not only stepped up to the plate here in Washington, but across our great nation. A lot of times our volunteers see our training on paper, they see it in our drills and our exercises. And for a lot of our volunteers here in Mason County, this is the first time that they've activated. And to see them at work, we have CERT groups helping out at food banks, testing sites, vaccination sites, hospital COVID screeners, Meals on Wheels, and driving senior citizens to get their shots. When you have a volunteer that gives a bunch of food to a kid, knowing that that kid is going to be able to eat that night, or be able to family be able to feed their family, it reminds you that the rewards are endless. Even though as volunteers we don't get paid, we see the rewards that being involved in groups like CERT or American Corps or whatever the case may be. We learn that if we work together with our stakeholders, that we can accomplish a common goal. And those of you who are familiar with CERT know that the goal of CERT is to do the most good for the most people. And I see this as a step forward, as the gentleman was talking at the beginning of this program, that I think this is a step forward for all CERT members and teams to get certified or step towards certification, to be able to respond and, hey, we maybe our groups will grow bigger and better and stronger. Thank you.
Okay, let's see what questions we may have for our panelists. Lisa and Laurel, will you read the questions that are in the chat and identify who the question is addressed to? And if it's addressed to everyone, just if you'll take turns answering.
Yes, this is Laurel, and there actually are no questions other than one Alyssa answered earlier about CERT profiles on the FEMA website. And so her email is in the chat. But there is one comment from Mary Beth Cottle to everyone. And it's a great comment about, she's the CERT coordinator at Cannon Beach, Oregon. At the beginning of the pandemic, our challenge was to contact our at-risk population virtually when many did not have computer access, and we did not have contact information for them. She is in a small town of under 2,000 people, and they could not go door to door to ask who needed grocery and prescription delivery or a Meals on Wheels type of program or any other service that might arise. So they created a flyer that they put in the post office with contact information for CERT and got voter registration information, including year of birth, to have a starting point for their database. The list was broken into manageable pieces, and CERT volunteers called their list, asked a list of questions that included who else should be contacting, and she believes that they would manage to contact pretty much everyone that needed help to get through this trying time. They also put the flyer into each food bank box to get the word out to the food insecure, and that they were there to provide help in accessing services. And actually a question did just come up for Jan Bromberg to everyone. So Jan, this is for you. Doesn't the challenge of technology for some people reflect how some volunteers may freeze when faced with a mass casualty incident? Blood and guts is much different than a pandemic.
That's a tough question since I'm not on a response team. I'm on preparedness, but I do know that they're called DAT, disaster action teams, contact clients over phones, and yes, it has been very difficult. Of course, they can't be in congregate shelters when there's been multiple family dwelling units, such as apartment houses, and so all of our response has had to be via telephone, pretty much specifically, so to get anyone who is in a disaster, personal disaster, such as a home fire, they had to go to hotels. And I don't know that there's a few boots on the ground people, and it has been done as safely as possible. I'm not quite sure how the response has been handled. I wish I knew more about that, but I can tell you that it has definitely been ongoing. We are definitely responding to all disasters around the country. There have been people from Washington that have gone to other disasters in other parts of the country, flooding, and mostly to assist people in their relocations. So hopefully that answers the question.
Great. Any other questions?
Another question, actually it's a comment from Claudia Warner to everyone. The Red Cross mostly does sheltering, and their CERT members would be more likely to respond to this type of situation. From CERT members, they are trained in that are trained in mental health. So there's a comment with regards to the Red Cross. And then a question, I want to say this is a general question to everyone. Did anyone conduct basic CERT training courses during the pandemic? Can this be done virtually?
I can answer that from the perspective that I have, and that is there were a few programs that were able to continue doing some of their training. They were very logistical about how they did it because the University of Utah has a program where you can actually do CERT um, online as part of it. It's a hybrid program. And so what you do is you complete modules online, and then in a normal time frame, you would then meet for the hands-on piece of it. And so I know a couple of organizations were able to do some one-on-one type of skills training. I'm thinking, Celso, were you able to continue any training? No, I think you said no, but I'll let you talk.
No, we didn't do any CERT basic training, but we did do CPR first aid. Like I said, we did most of that online, and then we brought them in individually. If there were a family unit, we brought the whole family in, and then we did their hands-on at a safe distance, following the CDC guidelines. So that was our extent of that.
Great, thank you. Any other questions?
You know, this is Harold Tiger from the Cheyenne River Sioux Tribe. We're gearing up to do that. Our tribe is putting internet access in our communities to do the same thing that Celso is doing, is to try and do the lectures online and then do the practicals in person. So I'd like to know how yours goes, Celso. So how it goes with virtual.
It goes very well. Like most training, and just take the example of the CPR first aid, basic first aid, and all that. That's a 4-hour renewal refresher. For people who have never taken it, it's an 8-hour. And if you limit your class size, let's just say 25, they all do it online. Once they're done, you get notified, and then they call in and set up a time where they can come in. So you just went from 4 hours to 25. That's just the downside of it. But in a good sense, everybody gets certified, and their certification still stays at a current level. And if you do your first aid, CPR, and all that, that's good for 2 years, according to the American Heart Association. So it works out fine. It works out great. I myself speak 10 languages, so we're able to accommodate those. In Mason County, we have 85% of our population's Latino, so we're able to conduct those classes as well. So we give it to them in Espanol and in English. We also have a few percentage that's Asian, so we do some of the classes in Japanese as well. So it works out well, and you'll have my contact information, and I'd be more than happy to talk to you more about it on the phone if you like.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Great. Any other questions?
There are multiple comments in the chat box. And again, if you do have any questions, please put them in the chat box. You should be able to bring up a separate box to enter your questions, and we'll try to get to as many as possible. Greg Hope made a comment with regards to Victor's question to Jan earlier, that I think your question is on target for our volunteers. I'm quite concerned about the psychological impacts of volunteers who see little to no action between disasters. Our professional emergency responders have access to peer support and other resources, and they have the acquired resilience of psychological calluses from daily duty both of which are missing for volunteers. I have been quietly pursuing some peer support training for volunteers in our jurisdiction.
The Red Cross absolutely has a disaster mental health group that takes care of clients on a one-by-one basis. So they are being served, and I'm sure that they are only one of many outreach opportunities coming up with other groups that that get out there and help people that are in disaster.
Well, we're running a few minutes ahead, but that's okay. I want to thank all of our panelists today, Jan, especially for jumping in to fill in for Adrian. You all have provided us with an up-close look at the impacts COVID-19 had on our volunteers and service programs and the resilience of your organizations to keep rolling, making changes to your processes as necessary and developing new ways to most effectively support the communities you serve. Thank you very much. Our next presenter is Greg Hope from the Whatcom County CERT program and Whatcom County Office of Emergency Management. He's been leading the CERT program in Whatcom County since 2015. Their program has been using virtual teaching and training, and he has some tips to offer on how to make the transition from in-person to virtual easier. Welcome, Greg.
As we've all been told at the very beginning, please keep your chat window close by. I want to give recognition and gratitude to Laura and Lisa, who are both monitoring our chat, and they're going to address your questions. And at various points, we'll stop and we'll talk about any questions that don't get handled directly by them in chat. We're going to be a little subversive as well. We're doing great on time. And so I think what I'm going to do is, rather than waiting to address all questions at the end, we'll probably have some pauses along the way to just stop and chat about things. So what are we going to talk about today? We're going to talk about teaching online. And for one thing, we're going to limit it to CERT-related subject matter, primarily because that's what my experience is. And we want this to be relevant for you. And we're going to be talking about training experiences. What you're experiencing right now, attending this summit, really is more like a webinar. You know, we don't have a lot of interaction going on. So for the next few minutes while we're talking, we're going to focus on interactions and what a real teaching, learning, training experience would be like. And so, gosh, I can't see the number of attendees that we have now. I know we got up around 90, but the context for our discussion is going to be what most of us would consider to be a typical CERT basic training course for up to 24 attendees, quite often fewer than that. And the point of that, of course, is that you need a confined number of people to really provide an effective learning experience for everyone. So what are we not going to talk about today? We're not going to talk about specific subject matter. We're not going to talk about how to teach lifts and carries online, although we can at least acknowledge that that's a tough one. Also, we're not going to talk about competing platforms. We all know, all of us are familiar with Zoom. We're using it this very moment. But we know that there are other platforms out there. There's Microsoft Teams, Google Meet, GoToMeeting, Adobe Connect, and plenty of others. You may be constrained by your jurisdiction to use a particular platform. We do know that Adobe Connect is the federally mandated platform, especially any of us that have endured through FEMA webinars. I'm talking about Zoom partly because that's what we're using now, and also because, for better or for worse, that's what's familiar to the world right now. If nothing else, 2020 was the year of Zoom. And so, you know, what are your members of the public going to be most familiar with? Most likely Zoom, whether that's a good choice or otherwise. We're not going to talk too much about troubleshooting either. We'll talk about some preparedness steps, but my gosh, there are so many ways that you can encounter technical challenges that we just can't dive into them here. And some technical challenges can be really specific to a person's home network, to the hardware that they're using, to software conflicts, and that's just outside of our scope for today. So what is this? Some of you might be saying, hey, Greg, that's kind of ironic. You're going to be talking to us about interactive experiences for our students, for our members of the public. And this looks an awful lot like a talking head. This looks like what we would consider to be a webinar or a presentation. So part of our subversion is going to be to try to build in a little bit of interaction, but also to acknowledge that what's happening right here and now is not what I would call a training. And why not? Well, because it's tough to conduct an interactive training with, now I see it's 86 participants. Let's dive in a little bit. In 2020, we all got accustomed to doing things online. And I'm fortunate enough to be able to reflect on other people's experiences. And in particular, my spouse, who teaches at our local college, and like teachers everywhere, had to pivot very quickly last year and go online. And so both through my own experiences and through hers, I've had a real unique set of lenses through which to see this. Some pros. Hey, the good news is we can conduct training and we don't have to worry about booking time in a community room or at the training room at a fire station or anyplace else. We don't have to worry about parking. There's no weather impact. You know, if we don't care if it's raining, snowing, or whatever. What are the downsides? As we know, going online is technology dependent. I don't think that I'm casting any derision at Microsoft to say that Microsoft is currently catching up with Zoom, which got more of a head start in this realm. Our local city IT department has been very candid about that. And so last year, when I was trying to run MS Teams sessions, my computer was crashing and burning, and I was gloating and saying, well, I'm using Zoom and it's running like a champ. That's a problem that's going to get resolved over time. Microsoft is going to iron out their bumps. They're going to continue adding features, but it doesn't change the fact that you need technology to participate in online instruction. And we need to remember, just as Celso was saying earlier about a lot of the public in his area, we have a lot of people out there who are either technology fearful, or they have a digital divide. They don't have adequate internet bandwidth, or they have older equipment. Perhaps they don't have a webcam on their computer. And so again, we can't solve all these problems, but we have to be aware of them and be aware of when there are barriers. It's an altered classroom environment, and we don't tend to think about this too much, but think about your own teaching style. That is to say, the instructors among us. Some people are very comfortable remaining at the front of a classroom with that good old dependable podium at hand, and that's kind of like your anchor, and it feels safe, feels comfortable. Other people are walkers and talkers and wander around a classroom addressing individual students, and this changes when we go online. The good news is that there isn't a bad seat in the house. Everybody that's participating in online training has a front row seat. They can hear what you're saying. They can see what's up on your screen. There's no one sitting in front of them. But on the other hand, you don't get to wander around and have those little magical moments of interaction with individual students. You have to work a bit harder, and I will even say emote a bit harder to maintain a level of energy in the classroom and in your job of teaching. And let's face it, when you pull together a large group of people into an online experience, you just don't achieve that same kind of tactile energy that you do when people are sitting together in a room. And, I mean, this is true for all kinds of things, not just instructional enterprises. I mean, this is true in our places of worship. This is true in other kinds of community gatherings. You know this if you're a sports fan. There's a big difference between sitting in front of the TV and sitting in the bleachers. And finally, of course, there's the hands-on component and all of the other components of training that require physical participation, and not only that, but participation with team members. CERT, Community Emergency Response Team. That tells us that we're not doing things independently. You've already heard some of the speakers discuss how things changed during the pandemic. And later on, another group of us are going to address that again. But at the very least, what we can say is when it comes to CERT basic training, there are just some pieces that have had to be put on hold, that have had to be postponed until we can get together. Until quite recently, it was just virtually impossible to bring together enough people for a 6-person carry and remain compliant with CDC guidelines. We couldn't bring in role players to assist with practice for things like triage or for lifts and carries, for bandaging and splinting. And of course, there's that all important final exercise where people are assembling together in teams and perhaps even working in confined spaces. Those are things that have had to be postponed. But again, you're going to hear from people in different jurisdictions explain how they've addressed that. So our next step is to talk about a course. And for our purposes, an online course could be online instruction for basic training. It could be a continuing education course, and I'll reference a couple for us that have happened here. It could be some other kind of online training experience. And again, this is a little bit different from a meeting experience because we have some educational objectives that we're going to try to achieve. Let's start by talking about the time that is leading up to a course. This is the time for planning your course. Every course has at least one instructor, and I'm going to encourage you to identify a lead instructor. And here we say, even if it's just you think of yourself, okay, I'm the lead instructor. And the reason for that is we want to encourage you to start thinking about your Zoom assistant. And if you're using a different platform, your Teams assistant or your Meet assistant or whatever the case may be. And also consider the possibility of co-instructors. In our jurisdiction, whenever we run either a basic training course or a continuing education course, and when it happens in a conventional classroom, the instructor is not by themselves. We fill the room with people. We have co-instructors that are there. Sometimes people get broken off into groups, not all the time, but they can roam the room and they can provide assistance as needed. And also they can hand off to each other. And it makes it a more rich experience for students if, unlike today, they are seeing and hearing from different voices during the course of the training. Why a Zoom assistant? Something that all of you are not seeing is a whole separate private channel of backstage interaction that's going on between and among all of the good people that are making today's summit happen for you. If you think that our chat window is busy, you should get a glimpse into this other back channel. And actually, this is the way things work, right? I mean, if you go to a large public event, you'll see people that are part of the presentation crew walking around with their headphones or with their handheld radios, and they're making things run smoothly. Up in here at Whatcom CERT, our position is that instructors should be able to focus on teaching. And that means things like somebody to deliver the gear and take the gear away at the end of a class session. It means other people who are responsible for promotion and enrollment of courses. It means that other people are there unlocking a room and then cleaning up and locking at the end. We want our instructors to really focus on their material and their teaching activity. So your Zoom assistant is the person who is handling attendees who might be having trouble with connection. They are perhaps even running a slideshow for you. If you're a person that feels uncomfortable with that, you could be doing like we all did back in school and just cueing somebody else to advance to the next slide, and you can just focus on your students. And like we said about co-instructors, it helps to share the burden. It helps to have other subject matter experts in the room with you, even if it's a virtual room. And it just makes it a more rich experience for your students. A course needs its content, and content can include a whole bunch of things. We're going to talk about some of these items a little bit further into our chat today. But do you have all your documents ready to go? Are they put into a space where people can access them? Do you have the links ready to share, as we will be sharing with you shortly, so that things run smoothly during that training? All of the same advice that applies to on-the-ground teaching applies online. Have you done a dry run? Have you confirmed that your technology, whatever it's going to be, is solid, reliable, ready to go? You know how to use it. How are you going to assess progress of your training? And we're going to talk about that in greater detail. And do you need to have a hybrid approach? Every one of us knows the answer to that. As far as CERT basic training is concerned, you have to have a hybrid approach. There are things that you just can't do online. The practicing and the planning should include everybody that's on that teaching team. And, you know, to go back to what we said about roles and skills, build out a robust team. Not only your instructors, but your Zoom assistant. You might even have some expert technical support. If we have people on our team who are really strong on the CERT program, if they're really strong on subject matter, if they're really strong on very specific content, they might need some help with the technical pieces. You know, they might need to sit down with somebody, maybe a clever 14-year-old, who can help them to feel more comfortable with the controls and the features of your online platform. If you're going to be using videos, if you're going to be using polls, all those pieces need to be ready, as we said before. Confirm everything right up to the last moment before class and be ready to pivot if anything changes. In a previous life, I also provided, I was a volunteer instructor teaching computer literacy. And at some point during our curriculum, we got to learning about email. And we had a little collection of generic Gmail accounts that we were using to teach these students the beginnings of email. And these are students who, in large part, had never encountered email before. And wouldn't you know it, the night before the class session that we taught email with Gmail, Google decided to make an improvement on their system or make some kind of a change. And all of a sudden, my handouts were obsolete and I had to edit them on the fly to accommodate a change. These things happen. And we need to be prepared to pivot with them. And we need to have plans for student recovery. And that doesn't mean pulling them out of a collapsed structure. That means, just as you folks saw at the very beginning of this summit, who do you contact? What do you do if you drop out of this? How can we get you back into it? Do we have a back channel text number that people can use to say, help? Do we have a back channel email address that we use? Can someone pick up the phone and call a member of our team and scream help and get some help and get brought back into the course? And what we want to emphasize is this is all part of your planning that takes place in those days and weeks that are leading up to the course. And after you've done it for the first time, of course, a lot of this gets used again. But I trust that some of the people in this audience are considering this for the first time. So let's dive a little bit deeper into practice and planning. When we talk about online training, there are some basics. Of course, one of those basics is knowing when to mute, when to unmute. And I'm sure that many of us have been in experiences where, and then all of a sudden they realize that they had been muted. And meanwhile, everybody else in the audience is waving hands and doing the ear cup and trying to tell them, we can't hear you. These things are just practice points, and they become second nature as you gain experience. All of these platforms have shortcut keys on your keyboard, so you don't necessarily need to reach out for your mouse to try to get something done. Some people prefer to use a keyboard shortcut to get something done, like holding down a space bar to unmute. Others feel more comfortable with a mouse. There's no single right way. And on-camera behavior. Part of your planning is to do as I have done and see yourself through your platform and confirm that you can be seen. I will tell you that right now I'm sitting in a room that has overhead sunlight, and in addition to that, I have a light with different color temperatures shining back at me to try to reduce shadows. There are purpose-built specialized lights now that are available from a variety of sources that are really intended just for online presentation, to give you shadow-free, diffuse, face-forward lighting. I'm not necessarily advocating that people run off and purchase a bunch of additional gear to get the job done, but do see yourself online. Try to see yourself online at the time of day when you're going to be doing your training, and just confirm, can you be seen? Can you be heard? Some people use headsets with microphones, others do not. As you can see, I am not. My personal opinion, which need not prevail, is that when you strap on a headset, it can be distracting for some students. And so I opt to use the microphone that's built into my laptop. Be prepared and practice and let it be second nature to be speaking directly to your audience. Many of us are running a second screen. I certainly am, with all that back channel talk that's going on. And there's always a temptation to look away to something else, and you're not paying attention to your students. It's okay to glance away and to get a job done. But remember, when you're on camera, you're on camera. And so it's a time to control urges to look away, to take your breaks, be aware of where you fall on the screen. Get yourself centered in the screen or a little bit above the midpoint on your screen. You do that by adjusting the angle on your laptop or on the web camera that you have poised somewhere. And people can hear a smile. I can't quote any studies to you, but we know from too many decades of call centers and from other telephone-based services that if you bring a smile to your communication, it comes through in an auditory fashion. Now is the time to truly bring that extra level of energy. And unfortunately, it's up to us instructors to bring that extra energy because we're not able to benefit from the energy that the rest of the room is bringing. I had contemplated the notion of asking you folks to turn on your cameras so that you could all see each other. And when I glance at our participant list, there are just a few that have done that. Thank you for doing that. And the point is, with a smaller group, you probably won't have the bandwidth concerns of having these multiple streams running. And it's one small way to maintain some energy in this shared virtual space. But you need to be amped up a bit. I've got a coffee cup here right off to the side. And I guess I should also say that, again, something else that would fall under the heading of basics is your physical space. You need to be in a quiet room. You need to perhaps have windows closed so that no external sounds are coming in. If you have cats or kids, if possible, it's best for them to be entertaining each other somewhere else while you're teaching online. Mute the cell phone. Be aware of possible interruptions that can pop up, that can be distracting, that can sort of break that zeitgeist in the middle of your training. We have at least one member of the group today that reported that they're taking part in today's session in a studio that is maintained by their IT department. So they're not sitting in their own home as I am. And they've achieved a lot of these objectives just by being in a dedicated studio that was built to the purpose. We're going to talk a little bit about going beyond those basics. As you can see, I'm sharing a screen with you right now. I'll add a little bit more to what should be obvious about that. We'll talk a bit about polls and breakout rooms. I'm going to talk a bit about third-party programs and the role that they play in what we're doing. And I'll just remind you that part of your practice and planning, if you build that teaching team, is to practice your handoffs. And you're seeing that today. You're seeing Paula hosting our presentation and effectively both being the traffic cop for questions and handing off between our different presenters. The same is true for you with your co-instructors. During that planning phase, what happens outside the classroom? Well, the things that we do for on-the-ground classes. Somebody needs to be responsible for advertising the course, for enrolling students, if any fees are collected, for collecting those fees. You do your students a tremendous favor by explaining what they're going to experience when they come to class. If possible, give them some technical requirements, offer some pre-class support. Hey, communicate back to us if this is your first time to take an online course, or if you have any questions about this. If it fits your objectives, you can share links for collateral materials before the class starts, particularly if you have some required reading before a class starts. That's dependent upon your objectives. Let's pause for a moment, and I'm going to give Laurel and Lisa a chance to speak up. Or if there's somebody in this group who would like to speak directly, let's give you a chance to mention that during chat, or perhaps unmute and say a word.
This is Lisa. I will start. Victor Harris from Everett has given everyone some additional tips. His first tip: if you ever present a slideshow and have someone advancing the slides for you, arrange.
Yes, that's right, Darwin. yes, our instructions said to turn off your camera. Good point. And I am being a little bit subversive about this. And it matters more when you're trying to deliver an interactive teaching learning experience. Again, what we're doing here is a lot more like a talking head, and it's a lot more like a webinar experience. Jeff, thanks for that link. Hope everybody, oh, and you sent it to me. Unless you say otherwise, we'll share that link out to everyone as well. Thanks, Victor. You're right. No eating on camera. I guess you must have experienced this at some point, and thanks for that reminder. Oh, nice point, Victor. Okay. Hearing nothing more from Laurel and from Lisa. Oh, Alyssa, we're asking if our speakers are unmuted. I'm not sure I understand your question, but perhaps you can expand on that a little bit.
Oh, hi, Greg. I just thought someone, maybe Lisa or Laurel, were speaking, sharing questions from the chat. I don't know if you had heard them. But I think you're good
You
now.
know what?
You've
Seeing and
covered it.
hearing no more. I'm going to take us to our next slide. Let's talk about some of those extras. Let me just make sure I got us in the right place. Now, this is more about teaching and being in the classroom. One of the things that we all benefit from when we're teaching on the ground, so to speak, is the ability to assess progress in the moment, to simply stop and throw a question out to the student. Hey, folks, does everybody remember what a tactical call sign is? Somebody tell me. A hand goes up, you get the response. In the online world, and again, we're looking at screen captures from Zoom. These are polls. A poll is an opportunity for us to ask a question and for the entire student group to respond. If you look at the image on the left, you'll see it says tactical in progress. You'll see that 0% of our students have responded so far. We present a question. We present 4 possible answers. When it's presented to our students, oh, I've got those swapped around. Take a look. Sorry about that, folks. Take a look at the image on the right. A tactical call sign is what? We give them 4 possible answers, and as students select and share their responses, the program is tallying up those responses, and at the end, we can display that little screen capture that you're seeing on the left side of your screen and see how many of our students selected which answer. It's a quick way to assess the learning that's going on in the room. It's a cue for the instructors to either say, bravo, let's keep moving on, or to slow things down and revisit a point and make sure that the understanding is clear. In our environment, when we're doing that, we acknowledge that you're not going to get 100% understanding every time. If it's a small enough group, if you feel as though you have the time, you can pause at any point and you can say, okay, let's just make sure everybody in the room understands this. But often enough, we accept if 75 or 80% of the students are getting it. And you can always invite students to contact you outside of the class setting to dive deeper into a question or to clarify some understanding. The nice thing about this too is it provides some feedback to the students. They get to look and they get to see what kind of understanding is happening in the room. And importantly, this is an interactive opportunity for students. The talking head stops talking for a brief moment and they get to do something even though they're just online. Let me take us a little bit further. Whoops, people are talking. Hold on. Let me pause. My speakers are up. Can someone please say something?
Testing, Greg, can you hear me?
I'm hearing you, John.
Okay, several people have tried to read questions to you and you were not hearing them. So now that you should be able to hear them when they ask.
Okay, we're going to pause right here.
I
I'm
can
going to
ask Greg if he
apologize.
can hear me. Greg,
Say it
can you
again.
hear me?
I can hear you.
Okay, this is Lisa. I can now read anything from the chat to you.
Sorry about that, gang. So if Lisa's not reading, do we have someone else among our attendees who wanted to comment or question? Now's the time. Oh, I forgot to turn on my telepathic connection. I'm not hearing anyone speaking. Lisa, can you, or John, can you speak up and tell me if you're hearing anyone at your end?
This is Lisa, and I do not see anything more in the chat.
Okay. And it seems as though there's no one in the group who wishes to speak directly at this moment. So I'll pause for just a couple seconds and then keep on chatting. Let's talk about breakout rooms and whiteboards. Breakout rooms are just what the name implies. And when we're working with our CERT students, there are times when we want to separate them into groups and let them go to work on some kind of an activity. If we're lucky enough in the on the ground world, of course, we can say, hey, you four, go to the end of the hall. You three, go across the hall into that room. You four, you get to go outside to the lobby. Here's what you're going to do. In the online world, we have breakout rooms. And as this little screen capture shows you, in the Zoom platform, you can choose how many breakout rooms to make. You can create breakout rooms before class begins. You can grant students permission to choose the room they go into, or the program can also just randomly dump a certain number of students into each room. I can't show you breakout rooms because, again, what we're experiencing here and now is more of a webinar experience as opposed to a class. And we really don't want to send 89 people off into a whole bunch of separate breakout rooms. What I can tell you is if you have not experienced it before, going into a breakout room online looks and feels and acts a lot like being in the room that you are in right now. If you look down at the bottom right corner of your screen, you probably see a blue button that says leave. When you are in a breakout room, you see a very similar button that says leave room. And so being sent to a breakout room doesn't mean you're gone forever. It's a bit like walking down the hallway. When participants have completed their activity, they can click their leave room button and they can return back to the main classroom. It doesn't exit them from the training altogether. Instructors and co-instructors can visit breakout rooms to provide support and guidance for students. You can chat and share files in breakout rooms. You can do just about anything in a breakout room that you can do outside of one. You can set a timer for a breakout room so that everybody gets bumped back out of their rooms at a specific time point as well. It's really useful when we have actual activities for people to work on. In a couple minutes, I'll show you a couple examples of some specific activities. We're seeing a couple more things. Thanks, Mary Beth. If anybody wants to try a breakout exercise at the next break, that sounds good to me. And yes, thanks, Victor. Absolutely. I am wearing my CERT regalia, but it's off camera. But it's a good point. When you are an instructor or a co-instructor, even if you're at home, you're in a professional setting. you want to uphold the credibility and the image of the program that we're all supporting. Let's advance a little bit further. Some of these things that we've been talking about should happen in the days and weeks leading up to your course. There are tasks to do the day before the course just to get things off to a good solid start. That includes making sure that everybody knows where they're going. In our jurisdiction, we enroll students and we prepare them for training via email. And this can also mean sending an email reminder the day before the course to the entire student group saying, "Hi, glad to have you. Class starts tomorrow. Here's the link that will get you there." And of course, you want confirmations with your instructors, any assistants, especially that Zoom assistant. You've got your materials put somewhere that people can get them if you're not going to email them directly. If there are any prerequisites, that might have to be confirmed as well. Some jurisdictions use IS 315, I believe it is, as a prerequisite to CERT training. And, this is a time to confirm that. Make sure you've gotten the certificate of completion from your students that they got from FEMA. Oops. I'm getting a little ding dong.
This is Lisa, and
Yes.
James Wolf wants your opinion on using virtual backgrounds and
Sure.
whether or not that's too distracting.
Nope, you bet. I'll get to that in just a moment. Thank you.
And Desiree wants to know if you have YouTube videos that could walk you through.
I don't have YouTube videos. Someone does. I'm happy to keep in touch with anyone offline and help you to track down additional support materials for this. Have your plans for your technical support. Also, if you have scheduled your course as a meeting in Zoom, you can enter your poll questions in advance and then just have them ready to fire off during the middle of class. And our experience has been every few minutes after you've covered a certain amount of material, you throw out the poll question to assess the understanding. That gives everybody a little mental break, and then you move on to your next subject matter. Let's just go ahead and address virtual backgrounds. Thanks a million, Jim, for explaining the impact that has on people that are taking advantage of an ASL interpreter. In fact, if you look on screen and you see our spotlighted ASL interpreter, she's wearing a solid color shirt and is sitting in front of a solid color background. None of that is by accident. One other thing to consider is that virtual backgrounds, at least in Zoom, I'm sure everywhere else, consumes a certain amount of your computer resources, including your processor cycles, your video processor cycles. And so if your computer lacks the horsepower that it needs, a virtual background can interfere with a smooth video stream. I'm not in favor of them myself, but I know they're very popular. I do feel as though they're a distraction. I suspect that even some of the things that show up in the background of my room are distractions, but I haven't yet taken the step, for example, to obtain a screen that I can stand up behind myself. Let's see if there's anything else that needs to be addressed right away. Oh, thanks to all for linking out to Zoom for additional support materials. The day of the course. You've got your breakout rooms ready to go. If your students are pre-registered, you can assign them to breakout rooms before class starts. If they're not pre-registered, after they have connected after they've joined the meeting, after they've joined the room, you can have a co-host assigning them to rooms in the background, so that's ready to go when you're ready to open the breakout rooms. You have made your co-instructors and your assistants co-hosts. That's actually a step that you take in the program. You have to assign that to them. And also you've taken an additional step through the settings to exclude them from polls. If you had a class of 12 students and if you had a teaching team of 4 people, you want those teaching team members to be excluded from polls so that when you run a poll and you're tracking to see how many people in the group have responded, so you can feel free to look at the results, you don't want to have to keep waiting for the 4 teaching team members who are never going to answer that poll. And of course, everybody should be joining that session early. I can tell you that for this summit that you're attending, there were those of us who were clocked in at about 7:30 this morning. There was all kinds of talk going on in that back channel, clarification and confirmation of details, so that when the 9 o'clock hour rolled around, we were ready to kick it off. I'll pause for a moment. Oh, some more tips here. Don't forget about using a large font. Fill the screen with large letters. You know, a lot of the same fundamentals that have always applied to an effective PowerPoint presentation are relevant here. Some of us may remember learning about something called the drop test. Way back in the day, one of the pieces of advice that new presenters would be given was take one of your slides, take the one with the smallest font size you're using, print it out on paper, set it on the floor, stand above it. If you can't read it, the people in the back row can't read it either. The nice thing about teaching online, one of those little advantages is that you can sample all of this yourself. When you're sitting 18 inches from your screen, well, you can feel pretty confident that your students are also sitting 18 inches from their screen. Nobody's in that back row. And so if it's legible to you, you can feel a bit more confident that it's legible to them.
This is Lisa. You're almost out of time, so if you want to wrap up, Greg.
Wow, and we just got to the start of the course. Okay, I'm going to hustle up a little bit. I won't sound like a rabbit. You know, at the beginning of the course, that lead instructor welcomes everybody, explains the rules of the road, how to get help, what to do if you feel like you got stuck. And you see here, I say students should leave video on, leave mic on, and maintain a quiet environment. What I mean by that is that with a smaller group, with 12 to 24 people, it's a much more manageable group. We have felt safe leaving video and audio on. And in that way, you create a more lifelike environment. People really can raise their hands and say, hello, hey, and the person leading the class can pause and say, oh, yes, Paula, you have a question. During the course, well, for one thing, this is where your planning and practice really come to bear. You can instruct your students to simply raise a hand. You can instruct them to use the reactions and emojis that are built into a system. Everybody here is familiar with a parking lot for questions and little digressions. You're making great use of it. Thank you very much. And of course, we're lucky enough to have Laurel and Lisa who are monitoring that parking lot, and we're either dealing with things in the moment or saving them up for the end. And there's always a risk of getting stuck with an individual, and you need to be prepared as you would in an on-the-ground classroom to guide a person into a waiting area or let them know that we need to get back on track. We'll address your question in greater depth outside of class.
Greg, this
Yes.
is Lisa, and our ASL interpreter is no longer interpreting because it is lunchtime. So I need to ask you to wrap up.
Okay, folks, thank you so much. You're going to be getting links for this presentation and for the handouts. I'll be available for questions for anybody that wants to follow up. Thank you for your time and your patience.
Okay, thank you, Greg, for your presentation. We have the pleasure of Suva Tai's participation. As you can see on the slide, Suva will talk about the National CERT Association, He has been instrumental in building the CERT program in the state of California, other states, and even other countries, coordinating several state and national CERT conferences, as well as acting as the driving force behind the creation and building of the National CERT Association, or NCA. Welcome, Subha.
Hello, everybody. My name is Subha Tai. I am the state CERT coordinator in California, very similar to how Paula is the state coordinator in Washington. I also used to work for the State Commission for AmeriCorps in the state of California and used to run a disaster department. Currently, I am with the California State Office of Emergency Services, and I am part of a preparedness campaign called Listos California, which very excited to see that we just recently got approved for another $25 million campaign this coming year. I see an ask for my video, so I'm going to take my thing off. There we go. So today I'm going to talk a little bit about the National CERT Association, a little bit of the behind the scenes of how it was created and what the purpose is, and answer any questions about this association. So the first thing I want to talk about is what led to the creation of the NCA. First of all, I was involved with assisting Florida with the National CERT Conference in 2018. And this was a 1.5 year planning process. Halfway through the planning process, the state of Missouri asked to host a national conference. So we invited them to join the planning team for the 2018 national conference so they can learn what it takes to put on a national conference, to meet with some of the subject matter experts and leverage them for their conference also. And then we started seeing some more requests for other states hosting national conferences. And currently, there's no established method of approving or supporting any states hosting a national conference. So we thought maybe we should create a committee with people who have been on previous planning teams to assist the new planning team for the next conference. And that way, more states will be able to host a national conference. Well, we went a step further and said, well, we're going to create a committee to assist with hosting national conferences. Why don't we create a committee that can support CERT nationwide? Because there's a lot of gaps in areas that CERT can benefit from. So we checked in with FEMA and see what they thought about the idea, and FEMA was positive about it. They said, yeah, that would be great. We would love to be able to work with an association or a work group to really support CERT nationwide. We got approval from their leadership, and in 2018, during the conference, we had a meeting. We invited subject matter leaders like Paula to a meeting and asked them what they thought the gaps were in CERT nationwide, what FEMA can do to support them, and then if there was a creation of some kind of national group, what that should look like and what should that group do. And so after that, we got FEMA's approval. So they checked with their lawyers, checked with their leadership, and they said, yep, let's go ahead and support the creation of a national association. FEMA assisted with electing the board of directors, so the leadership team that started to shape the group. The key thing was to make sure that this was a vetted group of subject matter leaders who weren't going to be doing things that were outside the realm of CERT or outside kind of what FEMA wants CERT to be, right? At a national level, just like how as a program manager, you want to make sure your CERT program falls within a certain line and it doesn't go beyond on liability or the actions or what your sponsor agency wants for your CERT program. FEMA also nominated the initial leaders for this group, and this group elected officers, president, vice president, secretary, PIO, and treasurer, typical of most board of directors, and then we established the NCA as a 501c3 nonprofit. These are a couple of the items that people mentioned during that meeting I talked about in 2018 during the national conference. There was a huge need for resource and guidance. So if you've ever visited the CERT website, ready.gov/CERT, you'll see a lot of materials that FEMA has pushed out, a lot of curriculum, a couple of videos, some guidance for private sector CERT and team CERT, but not a lot of other things. And that's because FEMA doesn't want to put out guidance that they can't make universal across all the states. And there are a lot of things that have a lot of particulars that are going to make sure, it's only relevant in your state or things that are not relevant in your state. So that prohibits FEMA from pushing out a lot of those kind of resources. But those are out there. I'm sure in the state of Washington, Paula and team have created quite a few resources that you guys have utilized that have not been seen outside your state, but they can be utilized, right? We can definitely share things that other stakeholders can vet for the use in their state. For example, we've all heard of the hybrid CERT training, right? This was developed in the state of Utah, and approved by FEMA for use in the state of Utah. And no one has ever heard about it until 2019. They did a presentation at the conference we had in California. And my program managers were very excited about it and said, hey, Suva, how come we don't have this in our state? So I talked with FEMA and I talked with the other NCA leads in Utah and asked, why isn't this in any other state? It was mostly because there was no platform, one, to present this to the other states, but two, to vet it, to make sure that it was applicable across other states and follow the CERT guidance for how to deliver CERT training. So the NCA partnered with Utah to make this available nationwide, and currently 35 states and territories have approved the use of this resource. So we're very excited about that. We're looking forward to approving other resources that have been developed and vet them for national use. The second thing that people mentioned was the lack of communication, right? And we'll talk about this a little bit later in the presentation, but there's not a lot of communication. While I've known Paula for many years now, before the NCA, we really never communicated with each other. We never sat on a webinar and said, hey, how's Washington doing and what can I learn from you? We were on quarterly FEMA Region 9 webinars that didn't really happen quarterly and were only 30 minutes long and didn't really give us the opportunity to learn and share and to network. So that's something that was sorely missing. And the last thing was more training, right? Developing instructors, trainer instructors, how to vet those kind of courses, talking more about how to run a program, things you see at these kind of workshops and conferences that you don't see regularly, but we should be seeing. And right now you have a great workshop that is open to your region, but not publicized nationwide. And this is something that we can definitely share, and I see that it's recorded, and maybe we can make this recording available to programs nationwide afterwards. So once again, created to do very simple things. It's not to take over what FEMA is doing for CERT. It's not to take over leadership of the CERT program. It's really to facilitate communication, support CERT programs along with FEMA, and then to lead projects that FEMA shouldn't or is unable to do. Much like at the state level where Paula really is a staff of one, and in California we're a staff of one, at the national level, Andy Burrows, who's the national program manager, really can only spend half his time on the CERT program. And then there are other staff members who are doing other things and maybe do one or two CERT projects. So there's not a lot of top level staff to help lead projects, but there are a lot of people like me and Paula, like yourself, who are more than happy to volunteer your time and expertise to really make CERT better as a whole. And that's where the NCA comes in. We can definitely create projects and leverage people like us to work together and create resources that can be shared nationally. We have an MOU with FEMA, and the MOU dictates how the NCA will work with FEMA and how the NCA will place itself in the hierarchy of the CERT world. For one, FEMA agrees to share updates and information with the NCA, which is very important because if we're going to help with the communication flow, we're going to need it from the source. And so anytime FEMA shares information nationally, they'll share with the NCA, which you can share. We've also gotten information that FEMA hasn't shared nationally yet because they're not ready, but they're willing to share with us and allow us to share nationally with NCA members and with the network of CERT coordinators and territory coordinators. FEMA also allows the NCA to use the CERT logo, and that's just something to say, hey, you can use the logo as you need in the NCA promotional materials and in projects. The NCA's responsibilities are to ensure that all programs can benefit from the NCA. So we'll talk a little bit about membership later on, but while there's a cost to join the NCA and a cost of $25 per year, for programs that don't want to pay that cost or can't afford to, there's an avenue for programs to still get connected to the communication and resource sharing of the NCA. So that way, no program is going to have a lack of the resources or will be gated from any of the resources because they didn't want to pay the membership fee. And that was very important to the NCA. And the membership fee really is just to go to pay for things that will benefit you as a member, which we'll talk about later on. And then we're also to support conferences and the idea of putting on a national conference every single year and working with a local state to host that conference and putting the expertise of the NCA behind and also the resources of the NCA behind planning a conference. Conferences are not cheap to plan. I think in California, it costs us about $80K to put on a conference, and that's before food costs and everything. It's pretty expensive, and not everyone has the expertise or the connections to raise that kind of money to put on a conference. And then joint responsibilities is that the NCA and FEMA will strive to integrate CERT into the credentialing that you're going to see get rolled out in the summertime. It's going to be very, very exciting. If you haven't heard yet, FEMA is going to be releasing national CERT credentials for certain disaster space. So when you deploy a CERT volunteer, a CERT section chief, or a team leader, what kind of training and expertise should they already have, how to vet them, and then how to put them and catalog them into the One Responder platform. So communications, in case you didn't know, communications within government is very structured, right? And when we talk about the CERT communication, it's almost like a linear hierarchy. It starts with the FEMA headquarters. So FEMA, Andy Burroughs, is typically only supposed to communicate with the regional leads at FEMA. So at each FEMA office, there's a CPO, a community preparedness officer, and an RPL, regional preparedness liaison. These are your two main leads at each FEMA region who works with preparedness programs like CERT and are the kind of communication channel between national and the state. After that, it goes down to the state coordinator, so like Paula in Washington, and then Paula will send that information down to program managers. So when Andy has information to share, like the credentialing, he'll share it with the FEMA coordinators. The FEMA will then share with the state coordinators, and states will share with the programs. The other avenue where you can get information is to sign up for the FEMA newsletter. So if you sign up for FEMA's ICPD newsletter, the Individual Community Preparedness Division newsletter, then you'll get some quarterly updates on stuff that's happening with CERT, important training dates, and then major updates from FEMA. But that is quarterly, what happens between those quarters. And while there's unofficial communication channels that happen, typically you're not supposed to go outside that communication channel to get information. It goes the other way as well too. So if you're a program manager, typically you will share information with your state coordinator, Paula. Paula will share with her regional lead, and then regionals will share with Andy at headquarters, and that's how information goes up and down. But what happens when someone goes on vacation? So if Paula goes on vacation for 2 weeks and she's not communication up or down, information is lost. When she comes back, sometimes she's able to catch up, sometimes she isn't. What if she gets deployed for disasters? A lot of state coordinators work in the emergency management office, either to coordinate volunteer donations during disaster or get deployed as a regular emergency manager during disasters. I am currently deployed for a border task force. So when I'm deployed, I typically will work 16 to 18 hours doing deployment work and don't have a lot of time to catch up on my regular work. And I've been deployed for about 2 months now. My longest deployment has been 3 months. That's 3 months where there is a break in communication. What if somebody leaves the position and they don't hire somebody, or they hire somebody and there was no handoff and they are still trying to catch up? What if they don't care about CERT, right? A lot of us, CERT is our ancillary position. So sometimes we get hired and we care about something else, or we just don't have time for CERT because we're trying to catch up. Then you miss that entire communication gap. So the NCA tries to fix this because what we're going to do is instead of following that normal communication channel, we're now going to feed you information directly from the NCA. So as an NCA member, as a program manager or a state coordinator, when we have information relevant to you, you'll get that information directly. So we get information from FEMA and we push it out to program managers, we'll push it out to instructors, we'll push it out to NCA members. So now you get that information, you're basically skipping that communication channel, and then you can in turn take that information and share it with your stakeholders. FEMA agrees that this is a good workaround to work around the government hierarchy and communication channel we kind of have to follow and say, look, we're allowing people to opt in to get information directly, right? That's why you join the NCA and then you opt in to get that information. The information that NCA shares is not one or nothing. So it's not like, oh, we have to share everything with everybody or we don't. We can share it with particular stakeholder groups. So within the NCA, there are program managers, there are instructors, there are state coordinators, there's volunteers. Sometimes information should only go to program managers and shouldn't go to volunteers. Sometimes information should only go to state coordinators. And this is information like stuff that's in pilot, stuff that's in brainstorming mode, that's not ready to be released yet, but can be shared with state coordinators so they can plan accordingly or they can participate in this kind of work. And the NCA will share information accordingly. So don't feel like, hey, this is a way for people to bypass and get information that they shouldn't. We do and are very cognizant of making sure that we don't over-empower people within the CERT world and make sure that we do share the relevant information to the relevant stakeholders. The NCA is kind of a combination of how Florida runs their state CERT association, which has a leadership board, and then it has members. And how California runs our CERT advisory group. We pretty much have a group of subject matter experts who work together to plan conferences and lead projects like the CERT Operation Guide, which you may have seen from Quick Series. And other states have a mixed match of it as well. So the NCA will have a leadership group, and this group will ensure that the NCA is kind of following the protocol, doesn't stray too far from the mission of the NCA and against what FEMA wants for the CERT program. A working group of people like myself and Paula and FEMA observers and CERT members and instructors who are volunteering their time and expertise on various NCA projects, and then NCA members, people who are joining so that they can share with communications and resources and be the conduit within their network for the information that NCA has. The leadership group, once again, are 20 to 30 individuals that were originally nominated by the regional FEMA leads and national FEMA, but will have an election process for electing new people. So every 2 years, we're going to rotate out people or vote in the same people to represent each region. And we have 10 regions, and we kind of mimic the FEMA region. So the same states for each region that's in FEMA regions will be the same for the NCA regions. And there are 2 representatives from each region. So Paula is the representative for your region and also represents Washington on the NCA along with someone else from your region. I represent FEMA Region 9. And then we elect officers, and then we have people at large. So we want to ensure that beyond the 2 representatives, there are people who represented volunteers, people who represented campus programs, access and functional needs, and other certain major disciplines to make sure that within the leadership group, there's a viewpoint and expertise and people lobbying for projects and for priorities that represents their stakeholder group. The leadership team can be found on nationalcert.org. Really quickly, here's a list of the leadership team. It's a mix of state coordinators and program managers. We don't currently have instructors or volunteers on there yet, but we're going to be electing them in the next term so that we have a better representation of the CERT world. The work group, so as we commit or create committees and work groups, people who are leaders in those committees and work groups are welcome to invite other people within the whole CERT world and NCA membership to join that. So it doesn't have to be people who are NCA leaders to be part of work groups that help with projects. So we have a trainer and program manager work group, and this work group helps with our webinar series, the trainer program manager series, but it also helps with developing resources for those 2 stakeholder groups. And we've asked state coordinators to nominate people to that work group. And then within the work group, we ask people to nominate their peers so that we can find out where more of the talent is nationally, but also bring them in. So any NCA member can be vetted to join the work group. And that way, whenever we have projects, we can ask, hey, who's interested in supporting this project or leading this project? And people can raise their hand. Very similar to your CERT program, where you look for the volunteers to lead projects and then ask your volunteer group who wants to participate here, here, and here. But also this allows you to cultivate new leaders within your volunteer base, and this allows us to cultivate new leaders nationally as well. A couple of the subcommittees that we have established are, once again, trainer program manager group, the CERT professional development resources. This is what's created in partnership with FEMA, and it's the name of our resource sharing library. And I'll show you the tracking sheet in a minute. Membership, which is to work on what the voting process is and election process is for CERT leadership and running committees and joining the work group. NCA communications, the NCA awards. So one thing that the NCA is going to be doing is starting to release the annual CERT awards. If you recall, FEMA used to do this through the ICPD division many years ago, but they stopped, I believe, in 2018. So since they stopped, they said, hey, NCA, if you want to continue with national CERT awards, you're welcome to do so. So we're going to start doing that with our first NCA conference in 2022. And then for members, we have members that are state coordinators, program managers, instructors, volunteers, general community members, and corporate partners. So pretty much anyone that has an interest in CERT, wants to support the NCA, or wants to be part of the communication channel is welcome to join the NCA. We have partners and sponsorships, and this allows us to leverage the NCA, but also allows us to partner with programs and organizations that can benefit with the NCA. Really quickly, you might have heard of Merit, used to be called Sigma, and Merit has a free login platform and a free digital badging platform that they allow CERT programs to utilize. But Merit is also going to be very instrumental in the ID badge system that the NCAA is going to start creating for our membership. That's going to kind of correspond with the FEMA credentialing effort. So we're going to hopefully have a system where you scan the ID card, it will show if someone has met any of the FEMA typing standards for CERT. So if they scan my card and I have been vetted as a CERT team leader, it's going to show CERT team leader once you scan my card. And that's very, very exciting. Merit is pro bonoing that and then incorporating that with our membership card. Merit has also been the headline sponsor for many of the past CERT conferences, both national and local, and have been a great partner for the CERT program so far. We also have a partnership with ProPack. So if you purchase anything from ProPack, and ProPack sells a lot of PPE and everything, if you mention the NCAA or National CERT Association, you'll get a 5% discount on your purchase. And then 5% of that sale goes to the NCAA as well, and that helps to pay for NCAA operations. I do want to mention that no one is paid by the NCAA, so I make $0 from the NCAA. NCAA does not pay for my lunches or my travel or anything like that. All the money that we raise within the NCAA through membership and through partnerships goes to help pay for the infrastructure. So our email systems, our web sites, our membership platform, our legal fees, incorporation, paperwork, and all of that stuff. We also need to start saving some money for the national conferences, because once again, that costs money to hold. Membership is $25, so $10 of that $25 goes to the membership platform that we have. The rest of it goes really to help pay for things I've already mentioned, but also goes to the annual membership item. So for NCAA members that joined before July 17, 2021, the end of the national conference in Missouri, you'll be considered a charter member and will get a charter member challenge point. And actually, I'm going to share what that looks like right now because we're very excited about that coin. I'm going to just pull a picture real quick. So that's the front of the coin. That's the NCAA logo, and then on the back of the coin, it's going to be actually the charter member number. So when you join the NCAA, you will have an NCAA number, and if you join before middle of July, you're going to get a coin with your membership number on it, and you'll be considered a charter member. People who joined after the middle of July or renew their membership after July will get the NCAA ID card with the QR code that you can scan to check your FEMA credentialing standards. Okay, going back to my PowerPoint. And then once again, anyone who wants to support the NCAA, wants to be connected via the communication or have access to the portal can join the NCAA. And I will say not everyone in your organization needs to join the NCAA, just at least one person should join so that they will be part of the email system and have access to our platform and resource sharing. And then once again, for programs that don't want to pay the $25, we're going to be rolling out a free program manager level membership. You will not get the challenge coin because that does cost money. You don't get the ID card, that costs money, but you will get access to our membership portal and access to our resource library, and will be on our email list. So that way your program does not lack any of the NCAA resources because no one wanted to pay the $25 fee. Before I close out, I do want to share our platform really quickly and why it's important to visit it on a regular basis. So this is our platform, NEP Connect hosted. And one thing that we do is we post blog posts on a regular basis in a timely fashion. So we don't want to bombard NCAA members with emails every single week. So when there's something that happens that are quick information that is that needs to be disseminated really, really quickly and it's time sensitive, we will post a blog on it. So when you visit it, you'll see like there was some funding available from FEMA. So FEMA announced that grant funding was available to pay for COVID-19 vaccination support activities. And so we posted that because we wanted programs to go check in with their sponsoring agency and see if they qualified and maybe lobby for more of their state funding to pay for things that they were already doing. Many CERT programs were helping with the vaccination effort. We partnered with the FEMA Region 2 on a webinar, the CERT Past, Present, and Future webinar on May 14th. So we posted that there as well. We also posted the virtual workshop that Fairfax County is holding. So this is a great way to get information really, really quickly. And then there's discussion boards where you can post a topic and get feedback on topics very similar to other discussion boards that you might have. The resource library that I had mentioned, let me pull that up really quickly. So the resource library is basically a collection of vetted resources that we have access to that we want CERT programs to have access to. For example, if you're a CERT program manager and you said, hey, the triage module is not in the new CERT curriculum. So in order to teach triage, we need to pull up the 2011 CERT curriculum to teach it. Well, you can't download that anymore on the website. So where do you go and get it? Right? You can email Paula and say, hey, Paula, do you still have that old curriculum? She might have it, she may not. She might say, hey, I used to have that on my old laptop, I don't have it anymore, or I never downloaded it because it was on the website, I thought it was always going to be there. So now where do you go to get it? Paula can email me and say, hey, Siva, do you have it? And I say, sure, I have it, right? But that's a lot of work to get a resource. But if you go to our resource library, which is basically a spreadsheet that has a bunch of resources and then links to download that resource. So you put the link here. 1 second. There's a control, there it is. And then you have access to that at your fingertips, right? You can control F. So if you put TTT, it should return the trainer materials, and you can access it, right? So as an NCA member, you're going to have access to a resource library that's relevant to your kind of permission level. So this is the master library. So this is stuff that all NCA leadership will get, and pretty much the state coordinators will get. And it has the old materials, new materials. It has the CERT liability guide. It has the CERT logo. It has links to webinars that we've done, and we'll continue to add to this. So anytime we touch a new resource, we say, hey, this is great to add, we'll add it to this tracking sheet and to get it. Now let's talk about relevant permissions. So you see here, there's a permission level. So permissions are pretty linear. There's NCA leadership, state, territory, and FEMA coordinators, CERT program manager, CERT instructor, and an NCA member. So if you are a CERT instructor, you get access to NCA instructor and NCA member permissions. If you're a state coordinator, you get coordinator, program manager, instructor, and member level access. We populate the main form, we set the permission level, and then we go back to this library here. We've designed the spreadsheets, and these are on Google Sheets, to automatically pull things that are designated for that level and below. So as a program manager, you'll go in and you'll see program manager, NCA member, and instructor resources. Now, once you have access to this, you are free to share this with your entire network, which is why I say, hey, you only need to be a volunteer or one person in your program to get access and share with whoever else. Paula can go in here and share all the resources that she has access to with her state. She can download this Excel sheet and then share it, right? We rely on the person that has access to vet who they want to share it to. So program managers will share it with the people in their program that they deem appropriate. So as long as one of your members or one person in your program has access to it, everyone in your program will have access to it, right? The reason why we have to gate it is because we don't want to empower a volunteer to get resources and then they start teaching things that the program manager didn't want them to teach, right? And we want to respect program managers, we want to respect states. Some states might say, hey, it's okay for you to teach that. In our state, we're not allowing triage. So don't make triage available in our state. So that's why we want to gate things and make certain things available, and then up to your state coordinator to share or your program manager to share. So we have an email. So our NCA members will email permissions at nationalcert.org to get permissions vetted to access this. If you're a volunteer, but you are a lead volunteer within your program, if your program manager says, hey NCA, I want this volunteer to have access to program manager level stuff. They help us run our program. That's all we need. All right. Once again, it is the person that designates at your program who should get permission. If Paula says, hey, Suva, I want every single program manager in Washington to have access to state level stuff, great. She says, do it, we'll do it. Right. That's the only reason why we gate it. We gate it so that the person above you tells us that you are able to get those level permissions. And that's the resource library. I'm going to stop my presentation here. I think I'm running up into time. So
excellent. Okay. Well, hopefully everybody's taken some copious notes on all of that information. It will go out to you, but thank you, Suvan. We appreciate your time and your commitment in making California and the nation safer and more prepared, and sharing your expertise with so many. You're definitely a role model for all of us. We'll make sure that Suva's contact information will also be in the chat box. So again, thank you, and I am available to answer questions pretty much any time that I'm working, and then some. So again, thank you, Suva. Appreciate it.
Paula, before I sign off, I do want to say you're welcome to share my contact information, but because I'm in the state of California, program managers, if you do email me, please CC Paula. Let her, in that way she's aware of you emailing me and asking me questions. I hesitate to offer any guidance or answer questions because I don't want to give you permissions or dictate how your CERT programs run in Washington. But if you CC Paula, it's going to make it a lot easier for me to say in California we'll do it this. It allows Paula to kind of chime in for the guidance in Washington. If you're a CERT volunteer or an instructor, please CC both your program manager and Paula if you're going to reach out to me. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay, our panelists today, and this is on the COVID response, are Tricia Parker, the program manager from the Bothell CERT program, Greg Hope, who you've already met, and Blaine Zecchinelli, the program manager of East Clallam CERT. We're going to allow each of the panelists to give their presentations and then respond to questions before going on to the next panel. Tricia, let's start with you.
Hi, I am Tricia Parker. I'm the Community Emergency Preparedness Coordinator for Bothell, Washington. I run our CERT and HAM teams. We had a dormant program for both of those before COVID hit, and when it did, we had just been in the process of revitalizing those programs. Originally, we converted all of our own things to an online program, and right when we finished that and we're getting ready to start, the University of Utah program became available and approved by the state. So we switched to that partially to give better standardization with other programs that might be using it. And it turned out to give us a lot more learning flexibility for our attendees. Being able to log into that and do units ahead of time on their own schedule seemed to work a lot better than us having longer online meetings where attendance was required with us during that time frame. For registration, we kept it very simple with Google Forms for our online registration and for our class surveys. And then for keeping that engagement and having not just that online, we had attendees do the unit in the Utah program ahead of time. And then we had once per week a 2-hour meeting where we discussed the coverage of that material, got feedback on it, answered questions, and then localized everything for our specific CERTs, discussing how this would look in our town, certain factors that might make some parts of the training more useful in our area than others based on our weather patterns and population and everything else in our local area. Part of that supplementation also included being able to have members of our fire personnel participate in those online meetings. For medical 1 and 2, fire, and search and rescue, it worked really great for us. 1 to 2 on-duty fire personnel would join our team's meeting with the understanding of everyone ahead of time that since they were on duty, they might be late, they might run out really fast, they might make it back and might not if they had to leave. So I did have material ready to cover that unit in case they were gone, which did happen a couple of times. Once they showed up late and jumped in wherever we were, and another they had a call during it and I continued on while they were gone. That actually was an amazing resource, partly because it not only gave that face of their participation to what we were doing, but it gave a sense of community. The biggest feedback we got from that was having that active participation, still be able to be there when we're doing this online. People were like, I got to talk to people that actually do the stuff my taxes help fund. I got to actually meet these people like we would have in person. So I highly recommend being able to bring police, fire, whoever's appropriate to what you're covering into an online class if you choose to do one and can work that out. It really added for the participants, being able to keep that part of it. We are still planning on our hands-on for the drill and for practice and the final drill. Those are right now set for June and July. We are keeping people's interest during this with emails of related tidbits, online meetings, and adding further trainings, some of the supplemental options, various things available in our area to keep people engaged and keep that learning going until we can do in person again. It is a different type of team building with this, and that gave us some pauses, and we shook things up a little bit partway through. As was mentioned earlier, breakout groups, different teams, having people each have a little assignment between meetings now and then to look into a certain chapter and see what they could share, and then having discussions about that were all things we were able to use to help keep that engagement high and that feeling of teamship, of a team and membership that you get from the online. Not quite as strongly as in person, but we were able to create that feeling and maintain it so far. Cons are again the delays, and that is our biggest thing, honestly. We had a lot of pros. Better scheduling for attendees around the rest of their life, to the point that we are making one online a year part of our program from now on, because we had so much feedback that the no need for childcare, no need for a commute, fitting it around everything else worked so well for everyone that that is now part of our general program. And if you are considering online CERT and have not done it, I do think that the way we set this up worked well for us, because having everyone do the online section first and bring those questions rather than trying to cover all of that on an online meeting made a huge difference in the camaraderie and the depth of localization we were able to get during our own meetings. And when we get to the Q&A later on, I'll be happy to answer any questions anyone has.
So I really cannot improve on what Trisha already shared with you folks, but we can provide a counterpoint. We, as you see, we suspended our training and exercise activities back in March, and we have not yet restarted basic training. Whether that's the best approach or not, I'm not going to insist. We felt that we weren't serving our students well if we were giving them an opportunity for the knowledge acquisition portion of training and delaying for, at that time, what was an unknown length of time for them to have their hands-on skills practice and to do that all important team building. So we remain suspended, but we actually have a core team meeting coming up on June 9th to talk about a restart, and it is going to be a hybrid restart, just as Trisha described for Bothell. What's happened since then? Well, like every other jurisdiction, our volunteers have been deployed for the pandemic response. As you can see there, they've supported food security, staffing at the EOC, our testing and vaccination programs, and also we were running a donation management program for a period of time. We did have a couple of exercises. They were very limited in scope. They were very tightly controlled. The Bellingham Fire Department ran a paramedic course, and a part of that paramedic course was a multi-casualty incident exercise. And we were able to provide role players and moulage support for them. We have a local moulage team, with much thanks to Laurel Sprague for her support getting that off the ground. It was a no contact exercise, and so everybody made compromises. You know, it certainly wasn't the best experience for the paramedic students, but they were grateful for the additional detail that we were able to bring to it. And it provided a very small exercise opportunity for a few of our volunteers. In September, we had a Zoom session and we did a catch-up for a number of our volunteers. And that was really just a social hour. Hey, how have you been holding up during this difficult year? Let's talk about our favorite CERT things and what the future might hold. 2020 was the year for our local triennial airport disaster exercise. Just like that previous exercise, it was had a much smaller scope than usual. The FAA provided some latitude in terms of their requirements, and we provided role players for that, but no moulage. In December, we had a freight train slip and fall. And so for a short time, our EOC was activated, and we had a few people in the EOC providing some support there. In January, we ran an FRS radio course online. That was a fascinating experience for us because every participant in an FRS radio course needs to have someone to talk to. And if you hang on for us to resume where we left off with virtual training online, I can share some more details about that. We currently have a monthly moulage course running online. We have a pair of really skilled people doing that, and it's just another way for us to keep our people engaged. I'm not really heavy on social media, but what we have been trying to do is put out at least a couple items on our Facebook page each month. We've developed this practice of recognizing the anniversary of some significant disaster events and then trying to make them relevant for our local area. For example, Mount St. Helens, which was just a couple of days ago in 1980. So I'll keep this really brief. I will mute myself, give Paula a chance to ask for questions, and be ready to pass along to our next speaker.
So Paul, if you want, I can give a little introduction into this while he's queuing that up. So my name is Blaine Zuccanelli. I'm with the Clallam County Fire District 3, where I serve as the Department Disaster Planner and Program Manager for our operation. We're the sponsor of the Eastern Clallam County CERT program there. Along with being an active volunteer, I'm an EMT with Station 31. We are located in the northwest corner of the state, with our county running the length of the Strait of Juan de Fuca. So we have approximately 142 square miles with over 37,000 residents that we're responsible for. We provide coverage for the city of Sequim and surrounding area. We also cover across the county line to the west side of Discovery Bay in Jefferson County. So we're a double county operation. Our CERT program is an all-hazard team. It's established in 2016, and we specialize in type 4 urban search and rescue. And we operate under what's called a responder level as a program. What that means is that we are an integrated part of the emergency operation plan in our community, and we deploy under a unified ICS structure as emergency service workers and under a mission number from the state of Washington. We have approximately 500 members in our organization, so that's a fairly high percentage. We're about 1.35% of the population is a member of CERT. We're in 14 neighborhood-based teams who train monthly, and each of the teams is responsible for somewhere between 200 to 900 residential structure homes, and that could be anything from a single family dwelling all the way up to an apartment complex. And it all depends on the density of the area, how many homes they have. So I'm going to share with you some of the things we've done in the last 14 months as a CERT organization to give you a glimpse of some of the things we're doing for our community. And as always, a picture is worth 1,000 words. And so what we've done here is put together a little short video, some ideas of what we've been doing.
Well, the first mass vaccination site in the state launched in Sequim, and it brought long lines of seniors ready to get their shots. Good evening, everyone. I'm Monique McLaughlin.
And I'm Dave Wagner. Thanks for being with us.
But while these bigger counties are still planning out their mass vaccination sites, Sequim already launched theirs.
People were honking the horns and waving and rolling down the windows.
A massive line, thousands of Sequim seniors ready to get the COVID-19 vaccine.
We had to close it down to 500 cars on the first day. We turned away 1,500 cars.
The Jamestown Scallum Tribe Director of Health Services says their rollout of the vaccine to Group 1A was a little sluggish.
But to be honest with you, we were seeing with the other groups maybe like 50% vaccination rate So we were thinking, oh boy.
So they teamed up with other groups in Clallam County to open up vaccinations to the 70 and older group a little early in Squim. The seniors flocked over.
When the seniors came, they got their arms hanging out the window and they got their sleeves rolled up and they're ready to go.
James Castell's grandparents were in this line and he took this drone video. Cars backed up all the way onto Highway 101.
I couldn't believe it. It looked like they went past town.
James says he and the kids used to see his grandparents all the time.
It's been really hard because of the risk factor. They're probably the ones that have sacrificed the most. You know, really quarantining, limiting the people they've seen. They're staying at home.
James says his grandparents waited about 90 minutes before getting turned away.
No! They showed up. They were about 15 minutes late. I think they missed by about 20 cars.
The tribe's health director says now they have a better idea of where to cut off cars.
So what you see there in the video, you saw over 200 personnel that were involved in this effort, including over 150 CERTs, volunteering 2 to 3 days every week. They achieved in 4 months a 70% coverage of vaccinations in our adult population in our area. And working with our partners in the rest of the county, we have achieved a 65% vaccination of our adults in Clallam County, which is it's actually extraordinary. We have 54% of our total population in the county as of May 15th that were vaccinated. You saw the final number they showed in the video there at about 24,000. We pushed that up. That was the end of March. We achieved that. By the 1st of May, we were well over 43,000 people in our area that had been vaccinated. And more importantly, I think the proudest thing we did is we achieved 85% vaccination rates for all adults over the age of 65, which is, we really protected the elderly population. It's almost impossible to achieve a 70% level if you've been working with these numbers, because the problem you've got is Your 18-year-olds are not included, or 18 and under are not included in your numbers. So for us, that was a factor of 18% of our population. So in order to achieve a 70% level of total population, we had to get to a 85% vaccination rate for every adult in the county. We have engaged in other projects besides this. This was our largest one. Our teams have done 7 different missions over the last 14 months. We recognized early on that in our leadership that one of the major problems for most of the community was the ability to get food. They were hurting economically, and so we started 12 months ago in June of 2020 a mission to provide food and for the community, and CERTs were integrated into that operation. They delivered over 600 tons of food. That equates to 60,000 boxes of food, or 1 million meals, to the community we had working with our food bank. They would effectively, as a food bank, deliver the boxes to us and do the logistics side, and CERTs ran everything else, putting it into the cars and getting it out to the people. We were also assigned a mission in, and so this is an example of the one I just described on the food, was what you might know as a community point of distribution. We were doing that on a weekly basis, and that engaged over 100 CERTs in that operation. We've also been assigned to a mission in March to educate the community by distributing to all the public businesses in the Port Angeles and the SQUIM areas of this county, stacks of informational flyers on what COVID was and what a citizen needed to do. So remember, this is early on, before anybody really knows anything about what's going on with COVID. And they were successful in delivering over 4,000 business locations with flyers. Also in March of that time frame, we activated our Emergency Coordination Center, which is think of it as an EOC for some of you, where we had our CERTs also performing for additional tasks. They managed all our message center activity and our phones for the operation there. They also ran our phone bank, or what we call our intelligence gathering group. They collected all the key data out of the community and gave us status on supplies, worker status, hospitals, hotel beds that were available, deliveries in the area, food availability, because we wanted to get a sense of how bad the crisis was impacting the community. They also provided support to our PIO officer there, where they ran kiosks in the community where we'd post information, and CERTs every day would go out and update those boards and make sure that they were still functional and doing everything they needed to do. And then we also had them engage with donations, because we reached a point where we ran out of PP&E for our personal protective equipment for our key hospitals. And in that process, they collected over 30,000 items from the community. The community was extremely generous. And in fact, that paid off for us. At one point, our Forks Community Hospital actually ran out of PP&E, and we were able to deliver 400 masks from our donation in our area of the community and got their doors back open again. So that was really critical. So as a final comment here, I'm going to tell you that what this program has done for us and ourselves. And there were times where I was just overwhelmed by the support from our volunteers. We had people deploying in 23-degree weather with snow falling, and still yet they took care of the community and in our drive-through vaccination program. And it's just overwhelming to see that. And the nice thing about it is our community saw that too. They came and they brought coffee, they brought plates of home-baked cookies, they profusely thanked them. And in times, you'd have tears in their eyes when they did so. And let me tell you, that just really moves volunteers in the CERT program. There's no other way to express how much they were moved by the goodwill expressed by our community. The community clearly supports us, and I just don't know how to say thank you to them as much, but I'll tell you, this was a partnership. The tribal government of the Jamestown-S'Klallam tribe was critical. They provided their health facilities and their nurses to make that event you saw happen. The city of SQUIM was also engaged along with our fire department, and we also had volunteers from our department, our EMTs volunteered to go out and provide medical support for this operation. And it created a new level of bonding in our community. We knew that we could face a disaster, but this was a disaster, and now we're working together. And so from this, we've had over 150 new members apply for our waiting list for the Academy and to join our efforts as part of our organization. And we're going to have our first post-COVID Academy starting in June. We're very similar to what you heard from Whatcom County. We stopped all basic academy because you couldn't get that hands-on experience in. But we're going to be executing that now as part of June. And with that, I'm going to bring it back to you guys, and that's, I think, my 7 minutes.
Hey, this is Lisa. Miles Williams has many accolades for CERTs across the country in their disaster response last year. And I have a question for Tricia, who from Brenda McCain, who says that that was exactly what she needed to hear. And did you say that online meetings started after completion of the course? Did a group start the online at the same time?
We set it up so that we assigned chapters of the course to each week and requested that the people complete the online portion before we did our online meetings. So they had already covered that material. If there was something they didn't understand, or if they had feedback we could pass on about how it was set up and covered in that, we could talk about it during the class. And we found that sometimes people would know they'd have a busy week coming up the next time, so they might do a couple of the units early so that it was still ready before each class. But we did try to keep everyone going in the same order, so they were covering it during the week, and then we'd talk about it and build on it and localize it during that same week's meeting.
This is Lisa. I have another question. How long after joining National CERT before we can gain access to the materials? And then from Brenda's, how many weeks to complete? I am assuming the CERT program, Tricia.
We combined all of the non-fire participation units into 2 instead of 4. So we did 6 weeks altogether. We combined the paperwork heavy organization, all of that, some of those into 2 classes instead of 4. And then medical 1 and 2, fire, search and rescue, each had their own dedicated week and online class.
Lane, do you have anything to add to that?
So in terms of what we could do operationally, we were really hard pressed. We actually, like Whatcom County, literally stopped all our ability to train new candidates. Now, we maintain monthly training for all the 14 teams. We did that via Zoom. And we have it also in our ability training library. We've developed about 60 video module training units, everything from START to CPR, structural collapse awareness. You have to remember, our team is really based upon a thought process that we prepare for the worst scenario possible, which for us is the Cascadia quake. And then we can dial down from that position anything we need to deal with this. So the pandemic was a problem, but it was not a overwhelming challenge for us, because from our training standpoint, it was just dialing down the level of the disaster for us.
In response to the question about how long does it take to have the membership, it should be almost immediate. They do need to add you in, so I shouldn't say immediate. I would give it a few days, because there is somebody that has to manually add you to the list. But yeah, there's so many great resources on that platform.
This is Lisa. I have a question from Buzzy. Tricia, when you get to the hands-on, do you plan to do a couple of days before drill, or divide it up over a couple of weeks, then do the drill?
Right now, our plan is to do 1 hands-on day practicing all of the skills, and then 1 other day for the test, partly because of the need for fire. We're having fire participation with some of those units, and we can only get 2 days of their time right now.
The next question is for Blaine, and are those training units available online, or are they restricted use?
They are restricted use. Much of the stuff we're doing in training is related to confidential information, both with law enforcement, because our teams, as I said, were integrated into our emergency response. And some of the material is a little graphic. So if you don't have the right pre-preparation, I think Greg talked about this earlier out of Whatcom County, you have to have people in the right mindset to see some of this material. Blood and gore is not necessarily the first thing you want to throw at somebody that just comes on board. It takes a while to build that up, to get them to a point where they can see that type of thing. And our process has always been, we know that people aren't seeing a disaster every day. It's not an everyday thing they do, but what you do is you train. So when they see that impact, they have the ability to go that muscle memory to keep going. And that's how we get our units to work well. We also keep them together in teams. So in our organization, what we do is we'll take two members of a CERT team, the buddy system, right? 3 of those put together forms a group of 6, which is a squad. Squad is the working tactical unit for our organization. 3 of those squads equals a team. A captain is in charge of that. And then multiple teams forms our divisions up across our organizations. And we have 5 operating divisions for our operations. So if you get into trouble, you got your partner to lean on. And that's kind of a philosophy we build into everything we do.
Okay, Blaine, that sounds like you guys have an awesome community response up there in Squim. Thank you to all your CERT members for their commitment. I do want to thank our 3 presenters for sharing their stories of resiliency and adapting to changes and operating procedures during the pandemic. I especially want to thank the CERT members in their programs and all the other volunteers who have supported and continue to support the COVID-19 response. We're going to take a 10-minute break now and return for the next presentation on disability advocates. Our next presenters are Jim House and Todd Holloway. I will let them introduce themselves and tell us what their jobs entail, and then let them begin their presentations.
Yes. So my name is Jim House. I'm the Disability Integration Manager for the Washington State Independent Living Council. I was previously involved with CERT. I had taken accessibility training in Redmond. And that course was very similar to the regular course, but we focused on disability and learning different styles. And some people learn best when they hear it, some people learn best when they see it, and some people learn best hands-on. So I took additional training to become an instructor and to provide access to CERT for deaf state employees. It's coordinated in Olympia, along with Steve Peck from the Office of the Deaf and Hard of Hearing. So currently I am here with Todd Holloway, and I'll let Todd go ahead and introduce himself. Go ahead, Todd.
Thank you, Jim. My name is Todd Holloway, and I work closely with Jim with the Coalition on Inclusive Emergency Planning. I work full-time with the Center for Independence in Lakewood, Washington, and we also have an office in Marysville and cover quite a large portion of Western Washington. I'm also the chair of the National Council on Independent Living's Emergency Planning Subcommittee. So Jim and I have done a lot of work together, including work with national organizations and state organizations here in Region 10. So I look forward to joining you today. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Todd. All right, can we advance the slide forward, please? Let me give you a brief history of CEP, which is the Coalition of Inclusive Emergency Planning. It's a statewide disability advisory group that provides technical advice on inclusion emergency planning. And we've been developing different partnerships with various emergency management and disability advocate groups for effective quality plan to respond to for response and recovery. And it's funded through a federal grant through the Department of Health. And it has been established since July of 2015, and we are on our 6th year now. Next slide, please. So why inclusion of people with disabilities? When we plan for an emergency, most often or typically, it only is effective for 80% of the community. That means that's not 100% of the whole community. So we need to include people with disabilities that make up about 20% of the Americans. So 20% of Americans have a disability or other accessing and functional needs. And the plan is, there's not always a plan for them during a disaster. So we have to plan together with different partnerships and disability groups. And there's nothing about us without us. Next slide, please. People with disabilities are subject matter experts because they have knowledge of services, resources, and supports that they require throughout our community. And it's important to include people with various disabilities to contribute and work together so that we can get qualified advisors who understand and can think through issues from disability access and functional needs and universal design perspectives. CEP can make connections of these expertise. All right, next slide. So here's a exhaustive list of many partnerships that we have all over Washington State. Center for Independent Living, American Red Cross, FEMA Region 10, Northwest ADA Center, Regional Alliance on Resilience and Equitable Transportation, Washington Division of Vocational Rehab, Office of the Deaf and Hard of Hearing, the Regional Service Centers for the Deaf and Hard of Hearing, and Washington State Assistive Technology, and Washington State Services for the Blind. And there's many more that we partner with. Next slide, please. So in our planning, we focus on 3 pillars of accessibility: effective communication access, program access, and physical access. And each of these pillars work together and support each other. If you don't have one of those pillars, none of them will succeed. Next slide, please. In regard to effective communication access, we address best practices and gaps in access to the 911 and other emergency notifications, including people who are deafblind. Washington School of the Blind, on their website, they feature that are designated for blind and low vision. So our website is accessible. Face masks with a clear window that will help with communication during these disasters. The Department of Health has developed ASL educational videos as well in regard to COVID and explaining that. And our program has a resource page as well that lists out COVID information. All right, next slide, please. Now, programmatic access and access to different programs so that we can all keep up with COVID and at the same time, other disasters that might occur, like the fires last fall. So we have an after action report that's available as well, and a PowerPoint that we can distribute that explains our experience during the fire. COVID, we realized there were many gaps with functional needs during the response. For example, the timing of access. As I mentioned, we sent out the information, but most of it was in English. And to develop these signing videos, we were a little behind on that. So they didn't get the information right away. There was a barrier in signing up for vaccines. A lot of people don't have access to the internet, so they were struggling signing up for those vaccines. Also, technology and policy barriers, trying to get onto Zoom meetings and meeting virtual. And we realized Zoom was the best platform for access. And also gaps not having internet access throughout the state. All right, next slide, please. All right, as far as physical access, the CARES Act and that funding that was provided helped tremendously for access with people with disabilities, as well as the affordable housing and mental health, and addresses isolation through the video program. CEP also provided ADA assessments for local shelters and vaccine sites, and increase the possibility for access inclusion, and state and local emergency response plans became more aware of participation from people with disabilities during an emergency and all of the planning and all of the details. So making sure that all the people are involved or at the table. Next slide, please. So our coalition meets every 2 weeks. We elevate disabled voices throughout the community. And COVID has really affected the disability community. So we've increased more partnerships and collaboration between disability advocate organizations and agencies. An all in Washington grant and local CBOs to get vaccine information out to the disability community, LEP, and BIPOC communities. LEP is limited English proficiency, and the BIPOC communities. Equitable vaccine distribution for people that cannot leave their homes, they're homebound, or they might be on some equipment to help them breathe so they can't leave the home, or they don't have access to technology. Struggle navigating the system. Next slide, please. So our recommendations include 3 things. We want to make sure that everything is integrated. We have integration, emergency programs, services, and activities that are integrated. For example, the 911 calls, CERT training, and disaster training drills. Also, program modifications in regard to rules, policies, practices, and provide the necessary and procedures that are necessary to provide people with disabilities equal access. And then emergency planning budgets, no additional cost to the people with disabilities for these modifications or accommodations that they need. Next slide, please. So our disability network at the state level, we have a CEP. At the local level, we have Pierce County and King County, Seattle, and Tri-Cities. And on the national level, we have partners in disaster strategies. And then other emergency management groups as well. Whole community approach is our philosophy and state level disability integration role. Next slide, please. And I think Todd was going to talk more about how all of these communities work together with and how we work with our partners and other groups. Go ahead, Todd.
Thanks, Jim. This is Todd, and yes, the way our groups work together from within the state, our local communities, as I mentioned earlier, have access to independent living centers. So we do have a number of subject matter experts who are involved with our independent living centers. With that being in the city and the county realm, we connect the coalition at the state level so that a lot of the same people in the counties and the cities that are working with me will also have access to the work that Jim is doing at the state level. And then that also is expanded to the national level, where we work with partnerships and coalitions across the country to be sure that accessibility and inclusion is taken into consideration with all the work that we do. We have done a tremendous amount of work during the COVID-19 pandemic, and a lot of that work was not something that was necessarily anticipated. We were addressing and assessing gaps to people with disabilities as they arose, and we were fortunately able to do a lot with the not only the CARES Act funding, but the ability to have the networks already in place that we've been working with. So having Jim in a position where he's at, we can also make recommendations to the state and to local municipalities about what advisory groups they may be able to get support from us in. For instance, the Governor's Committee on Disability and Employment supports Accessible Communities Advisory Commissions or councils, and we do support them by providing them with other information that can have them be involved with emergency management, as well as disaster mitigation and working on pandemics now. Thanks, Jim.
Perfect. Thank you, Todd. Next slide, please. Our partners on the national level include FEMA Region 10, International Associations on Emergency Management, National Emergency Numbering Associations, and the 911 program, as well as this group. Todd, did you want to talk a little bit more about how some of those programs work with us?
Absolutely, Jim. This is an area where we really gain a lot of strength by joining together with other regions. We've been fairly fortunate here in the Northwest to not have as many catastrophic disasters. Though we are in the midst of a pandemic, a lot of other parts of the country are experiencing co-occurring disasters, including hurricanes, and we're going into an early hurricane season this year. So when we look at our Region 10 partnership with FEMA, it is essential that we connect not only with the same partners from state to state, but also with the local groups, and then reaching out to our national partners. So the regional disability integration specialists across the country who know each other. Together, we work with organizations like the Partnership for Inclusive Disaster Strategies to make sure that we're all being informed equally and with the same information. Jim has done an enormous amount of work with CERT, the Community Emergency Response Teams, making them accessible. He is an instructor. He works with others across the country, as well as I do, who work with Citizen Corps and CERT from large municipalities, large cities, down to rural communities. And those rural communities have different needs, obviously, but they are just as affected by, well, they're in some cases more affected by the same barriers and gaps that the rest of us are. A lot of these groups that Jim has listed here are all part of what one partnership that we do connect with on a daily basis during the pandemic. And this has helped us to be able to be sure that we're all not only on the same page, but we're sharing best practices across the country. The National Council on Independent Living has had an emergency planning subcommittee for many years, but it's only recently that we've been able to expand to start to see disability access and functional needs positions added to state and local organizations that are connected to government and some not government. This is incredibly important because it has somebody who is inside the organization that can help connect with us to be that conduit so that we can consistently and constantly share information back and forth. Thanks, Jim.
Wonderful, thank you. So one of the things that we'd like to be involved with next year is our training. It's going to be called Cascadia Rising 2022. So that's new for us because we're providing access and functional needs for different perspectives during a disaster. But Todd, did you want to add a little bit more about that as well?
Thanks, Jim. Yeah, Cascadia Rising 2022 is starting off at hour 96. We were just getting off the ground with the coalition that Jim is the head of right now in 2016 when we had Cascadia Rising 2016. And that period was from the 0 hour of the initial subduction zone quake up to 96 hours. So a lot of what we're going to be doing is looking at the part we played in the Cascadia 2016 exercise and looking at the gaps there and highlighting some of that at the beginning of play of this exercise, even in the planning process that will start at 96 hours in. So we will get to highlight a lot of the barriers and the gaps that occurred for people with disabilities in that exercise and expand on them to identify even more gaps going forward for this coming exercise. There will be a lot more disability integration partners involved with Cascadia Rising 2022 than there were in 2016, and this is a great thing. We're moving in the right direction, and we have a lot of good people on board, including Lisa Kraft, who is in my mind, the pinnacle of disability integration within the American Red Cross. She is a true leader, and we're all fortunate to have her. Thanks, Jim.
Great, thank you. So now I'd like to explain to you about the access and functioning needs. I have mentioned this. There's an acronym that will help you remember, CMIST, C, missed. Let me tell you what that C is for: communication. M means medical. I, independence. S, services, support, and self-determination. And T stands for transportation. So the work we do relates to communication, benefits people who use sign language, and also those who don't know English. Another example, for example, transportation. People with disabilities often need transportation, but they are not able to escape independently. They don't have a car per se. Maybe they don't. Maybe they use a bike or a bus. And if it was a disaster that would happen, we would have to include them to help them evacuate if necessary. Next slide, please. So there's immediate roles for immediate disaster or different resources, materials to be identified. There's shelter vaccines sites. There's a lot have accessibility, and we're analyzing what ADA purposes they have. We're tracking documents for the best practices and shortfalls in local and state emergency response efforts. We provide technical assistance. There's a long list of topics for emergency management. We help with the public health officials, the CEMP plan for review development for inclusion of access and functional needs. We reach out in short-term recovery and long-term recovery community efforts. We also provide an AFM expert to partners including DOH, EMD, and other state local agencies. Next slide, please. So our coalition, we develop different relationships. The relationships I've started 3 years ago, and we developed new partnerships, and we're growing our network. And that really helps. Last year when we did have the pandemic and COVID was growing, and our partnerships, we were all connected and in sync, and that was more efficient and successful to our response to recover in the long-term recovery. Next slide, please. How many people, do you know how many people with disabilities are here in America? There's about 20% of Americans that have disabilities, that have some kind of disability. This was 2010. 57 million people identified with a disability, and it has probably increased over this time because people are getting older, and people are also born with a disability, and they live with a disability. So there's two different categories there. We have 48 million people that have some kind of hearing loss or disability. Over 1 million are legally blind or have low vision. 1 out of 68 children have autism. And there's about 61 million people that speak a different language other than English. Next slide, please. So here's some resources that's related with accessibility and functioning needs. From ready.gov, Washington Emergency Management Division. We have many communities that we partnership all around Washington State that can help connect to lead you to a resource that you need in your area. Next slide, please. So yeah, you can join. If you'd like to join our program, we have meetings every 2 weeks. The next meeting is going to be this coming Wednesday, 10 to 11. You could send me an email and I would be happy to connect you. Todd, would you like to add something?
Jim, thank you. I think this is a great opportunity, as Jim mentioned, the partnerships and the relationships that we have built long term. Expanding those during the pandemic has paid off in dividends. I think this is the real success. The wonderful outcomes that we have had have been the result of building those partnerships, relationships, and being able to share with one another, relate not only emergency management issues related to disability, but disability in general. There's a great amount of work that we can do together. We just have to know each other are there and to reach out and be able to ask and answer questions.
Definitely. Yeah, and just to talk about it, everyone's right. Yeah, everyone could be impacted with a disability through possibly a car accident or an illness, or anything could happen. So just being more aware, thinking of the big picture outside of the box. Really, when there's an emergency plan in effect or any kind of drills, we can recruit people, local people with disabilities in your community and everywhere, all over the state, that, we don't know all of these people. And there's one person with a disability we can check off the list, but really there's so many more than just one person. Different people have different experiences and different kinds of disabilities that we're not aware of.
This is Alicia. We do have a couple comments in the chat. The first one is from Victor Harris. He says, or they say, one of my greatest concerns is evacuating disabled to safe places. If out of the region, transportation may be ineffective. Buses have limited wheelchair securement, which will greatly exceed capacity. Additionally, there's no guarantee a bus driver will or will be able to return to evacuate another group of passengers. Transportation managers need to closely scrutinize plans for those unable to drive. Victor's also found the disabled community has fared better in the pandemic because we're used to being ignored and isolated, meaning we were comfortable with online communication, but that does not excuse exclusion of people with disabilities.
Oh, Todd has a response to that?
Yeah, I did. This is Todd. I did make a response to Victor's comment about the transportation and the fact that RARET, the group that we work with, Dean on a regular basis with, has some great opportunities there to look at the gaps, which there are many in transportation. The other thing that I point out about the isolation and the use of media to communicate and to get together, isolation, if it's a choice, is fine. But isolation that is brought about by systemic failures, isolating people with disabilities, is not acceptable. And I know Victor knows this and was not expressing that that was an advantage to people during the pandemic. But the ability for people to get together, it should be equal. And I think one of the things we're going to find during this pandemic is that a lot of people are going to suffer enormous amounts of anxiety and other emotionally prompting issues that can cause people to have some real questions about isolation and how they were quarantining and the other issues around that. So a systemic issue is not acceptable. If you choose to be isolated, that's different.
This is Alicia again. There are a couple more comments from Victor saying disability includes everyone, even Top Gun pilots are disabled. That kind of arrogance must be a debilitation. More to the point, anyone can become disabled in a heartbeat. Plan for yourself as if you may be disabled next week. Mary Beth Cottle, I hope I pronounced that correctly, says everyone has strengths and weaknesses. A good program will be able to access all strengths and help address or accommodate weaknesses. Glenn Devitt.
Oh, also, this is Jim here. Not all disabilities are visual. You could just walk right by a person on the street and you wouldn't even know that I would be deaf until I would start to talk or communicate. And then you could identify my disability. But you can't just assume, that's not a good thing. So you could ask, what's the best way to communicate with you? What's the best strategy, how we can work together for communication? Things like that.
Mm-hmm. Glenn Devitt adds, Victor, I like the phrase temporarily abled, provides perspective.
Okay, I think we're finished here.
All righty. I think we've gone through the questions too at this point. That was really great, guys. Thank you so much for sharing your insights and learnings with us. It's very valuable information and extremely important in ensuring that we are supporting all community members, especially in emergencies and disasters.
Thank you.
Okay, it's time for our last break before we conclude.
Thank you so much.
You're very welcome. Thank you. We'll take a quick break and then we'll get back, bring Greg Hope back on to finish up his slides and to take any questions you might have. All righty, Greg, go for it.
Give me just a second here and I'll share screen with you and explain what's going on. Remember when we talked about practice and planning? If you look down under Beyond the Basics but Essential, you see me listing a couple things that we never talked about, including whiteboards, Padlet, Google, and there's ETC there. So let's have a quick peek at these, and then I sure do hope you raise the bar on your choices for the rest of this beautiful Friday afternoon. Let's talk about a whiteboard. I'm going to pull one up for you. So we're all looking at a nice blank whiteboard, and I'm no artist, but what I want you to see is that those of you who are familiar with working in a conventional classroom with boards on the wall, these online tools have a variety of different tools that we can put to work to help us get a point across, whether we're drawing a medical treatment area or an evacuation route, or as I'll show you, as we're doing other things. And a nice thing about Zoom is that multiple people can share a whiteboard. And so we can have everybody contributing to a collaborative work. We have tools to help us clear a whiteboard and erase it, and we can save what we create on a whiteboard. Let me stop this. I'm going to take us back to the slide that we were just looking at a moment ago. Hey, now we're back to looking at that slide, and I just want you to see that a moment ago, we were looking at a whiteboard that's built into Zoom, and lo and behold, those same tools are available to us when we are sharing a screen. We can draw, we can add text to right on top of a screen that we're sharing, and there are a variety of other little tools that we can use. And again, the point here is that we're trying to replicate as much as we possibly can of the on-the-ground classroom. And with sharing tools like this, we can involve our students. We can send them off to a breakout room. They can fire up a whiteboard and they can start to collaborate using this kind of a tool. Now, for clarity, I'm going to clear off all my stuff with just a couple of clicks. And in the interest of time, I'm going to jump forward a little bit, and I'd like to show you just a couple more examples of using some third-party tools. So folks, I'm looking to my second monitor right now. We're looking at a free online tool called Padlet.com. And I threw together a very quick example for you to look at. Again, as I said, this is a free tool. They have a premium version that allows you to create a larger number of these Padlets. But right now, you are looking at one single Padlet. And it's an online collaboration tool. What I hope you're all seeing here is 3 different columns: Team Alpha, Team Tango, Team Foxtrot. And I just quickly tossed a little scenario into each of these columns. And you can imagine this as not necessarily a shared activity, but a community activity in the classroom. For Team Alpha, we just said, hey, a big bad thing happened. You're trained CERT volunteers. What are you going to do in the next 5 minutes, hour, and 3 hours? And here is an opportunity for someone to say, oh, my teammates, hydrate, etc. Now, the thing to take away from this, if I use that annotation tool that we just talked about, allow me to draw your attention up to the top right corner. What I would like for you to see is there is a sign up link there and there is a login link. I am not logged into this. Earlier today, I created this little sample Padlet and pre-populated it for you to show you the example. But the person that is commenting on this, that's adding to this, is anonymous. Your students don't need to create an account. They don't need to go through a lot of pain to use this tool. Any of you who wish to, you're more than welcome to click that link that I gave you in chat, pay a visit to this. In fact, I encourage someone to do it and add a little bit to Team Alpha, Team Tango, or Team Foxtrot so that everyone can see this happening. Hey, it worked for somebody. This tool allows you to arrange your content in different ways. It allows you to choose from some nifty backgrounds or add a dramatic photo of your own for a background. It allows you to embed links and photos and a variety of other content. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to unshare and I'm going to show you another quick example. Here's something that's a little bit more challenging for the eyes. A couple of years ago, we were playing with this tool and we thought maybe we would use this as a platform for our moulage team. Turns out they're using a different tool and that's just great. But what I would like for you to see is that using this tool, I can't click on that. I can drag all of these boxes around. I can add more boxes. Here's a brand new one. New text box. Hey, this works. And things don't have to be in nice, neat columns. You could have different student teams, each working in their own box, and everybody can see something that's going on. You can get very creative with this. And really the message that I want to share with you is that this is a free tool. It doesn't require anyone except you, the originator, to create a login account. You can pull it up with a link and use it and put your students to work with it. It's 2021. Just about everybody is familiar with Google Docs. As a matter of fact, that presentation that you were looking at, it's a Google slideshow. But here we are looking at a very, very simple Google Doc. And again, what I've done is I've just thrown together a simple scenario. I threw in some questions, and our students can visit this with a shareable link and start editing and can collaborate on this themselves. Many of you in the audience are already familiar with collaborative editing. And so this is more of a reminder than anything else that, you know, when we say, oh my gosh, I can't bring my students together, there are ways that you can get close to that. You can get students into breakout rooms so that they can have uninterrupted conversations without crosstalk from other teams. You can use these collaborative tools so that they can work together on a single product and not be sitting in the same space. And in fact, they can be shared back out with a larger group. This is not so much about how to use each one of these tools, but rather kind of like a survey to show you the tools that are available and the role that they can play in the training. I bet many people among us have completed an online survey, and there are a whole bunch of different online survey tools available, but here's a simple Google form. It's a tool that's very easy to learn and use and to deploy with. This happens to be a sample quiz, a place for the student's name and email address, some sample questions that they can answer that, again, have to do with knowledge acquisition. They submit it. When you look at the results of one of these surveys, Google will automatically generate a chart for you, and it will even choose the kind of chart based on the structure of the question. You can either show immediate results, or you can just collect them and then reflect on them later. This is a little bit different from running the polls in the middle of a Zoom session. The polls are as immediate as you can get. Up comes a set of poll questions, and people respond, and the answers are displayed seconds later. When you start to compose things like quizzes, things can get a little bit more complicated, and you have to go through some extra steps to reveal the results to your students very quickly. One thing also to say about this is if you're looking at this sample quiz, I call it a quiz, but the truth is that it's not, because a true quizzing tool, and there is a quiz tool available, for example, in Office 365, in Microsoft Forms. A true quizzing tool allows you to designate a correct answer, and it will calculate a score based on the answers that students submit. So even though up at the top here, this says quiz, it's not exactly a quiz. It's still more of a survey. How many students gave this answer? How many students gave that answer? We're not automatically returning a score to these people. Here's a class evaluation, and I confess we haven't used these. Instead, what we've done is up in Whatcom County, we put together a post-course evaluation that doesn't ask specific questions about individual classes and their content, and instead we ask questions about the course as a whole. It's just a little bit different focus. But here's a sample class session evaluation. This is for Unit 1, which we all know is Intro to CERT and some of the other pieces. And here you see we have yes/no questions. We have short answer questions. Here's another yes/no question. We can click a next button. Whoops, this is required. And take us into some following questions, and then finally wrap up with a submit. This has been a super fast sharing of just a couple online tools that we can pull into our online training, and they're comparatively simple to learn and set up and put to use. And I know that many of you will be familiar with other tools. One of the biggies out there right now is called Kahoots, and it's actually an online game platform. It allows you to construct your online game with questions that get answered. And the only reason that, yeah, I mean, you have to limit the amount of examples that you share, but also I lean pretty heavily on Padlet and simple Google Docs. You could be using Office 365 online documents in the same way. Again, because of ease of use, and not only that, but ease of access for your students as well. One thing nice to recall about using a tool like Google Slideshows, or you can use the iCloud equivalent, I think they call it Keynote, or of course, Microsoft PowerPoint, is, while we all remember that content is king, you do want to put a nice face on things. And when you use these tools, the themes that they have built in are professionally designed, and most of the time you can trust them to successfully achieve font sizes and achieve the necessary contrast that you need for easy viewing online. Doesn't mean it's 100% reliable, but you don't have to start from scratch and be thinking, oh, what color should my background be? And if it's that color, what should my text be? Those things are being done for you. Here are some important tasks to complete before the day of the course. On the day of the course, get everybody there early, make sure everybody knows what they're going to do, have somebody on hand to provide a little bit of support for the students on the side so your instructors can focus on instruction. When we fire up the course, everybody needs a welcome. People need to know when and how breaks will happen. One thing that we didn't choose to use today for the summit, but I'm providing a link for, is a timer. There are a whole bunch of free countdown timers available online. I just shared a link for one of them, and you might find it helpful when you take a break to just start up this big bold-faced timer for your students, so at a glance they can look over and say, oh, I've still got 3 more minutes, time for one more handful of popcorn or whatever it is. Again, we have a large number of people here today. We still have 59 people that chose to spend their afternoon this way. Thank you. This is too large of a group for everybody to have their mics and their video on, but personally, I'm going to recommend that you consider it when you're working with a more easily manageable group. During the course, class management still matters. A parking lot and a parking lot attendant, so to speak, really matters. We talked about breaks and timers. We talked about somebody watching the chat. And at the end of the course, a moment ago, I mentioned that post-course survey. The only thing I want you to know about this is, because we're involved with CERT training, we're all accustomed to the concept of the hot wash, the debrief, especially after that final exercise. And you have the same option with an on-the-ground course, but I'll just remind you that in the online realm, you have a decision to make. There are benefits to allocating time during your course for that feedback at the end, or for running a survey. You could do it with a poll if you wished. But we also have the option of using good old Google Forms or Microsoft Forms or SurveyMonkey and capturing that post-course feedback. Later on, it's something students can do at their own leisure. Of course, we have to acknowledge that if you allow a little bit of time to pass after the end of a course, memories are not going to be as clear. And the longer that we get away from a request like that, the easier it is to just ignore it and not turn in anything. As we do here, please be sure to plan for links for collateral materials and support materials. And at the end of the course, contact info. And if you can, also recommend next steps. Up in Whatcom County, when we conclude a basic training course, we always make the pitch for students to remain active with the program, to become registered emergency workers, but we also explain additional training options and exercise options that are available to them after basic training. The same is true for any instructional event that you run. That's your opportunity. You've got them in front of you. Now's the time to make the pitch. Now's the time to let them know that there's more to come and things just didn't end today.
Thank you, Greg. That was awesome. What a trove of tools that you've given us. We will make sure that all of those links get put into the presentation that goes back out to you. It may have to come in a couple of different versions because there's so much information. But I want to say thank you so much for joining us today, for all my presenters and the panelists. I hope it's been a valuable experience for you. I want to thank as well the members of the planning committee who did such a great job in organizing and coordinating everything that we've been doing today, as well as Lou Thompson, sorry, I keep reading it Thomas, but it's Thompson from Serve Washington. She was supporting the whole Zoom platform for us. She provided it and a lot of expertise in the background of how the Zoom platform worked for us today. So thank you. And a thank you to our two interpreters today. Thank you very much. Hopefully they were able to provide the help that we need for getting the messages across in our presentations. Before we finish, I want to introduce Alyssa Plumer. She's the Community Preparedness Officer for FEMA Region 10. She has been a great partner for the CERT programs in Alaska, Idaho, Oregon, and Washington, and her support in promoting the CERT programs and all things preparedness in the region has been very instrumental in our success. So welcome, Alyssa.
Hi, everyone. I just wanted to say thank you again for being here and for taking the time out of your day to spend the morning and afternoon with this awesome group. I want to give a huge round of applause to Paula Town. So virtual round of applause. We would not be here without her. She brings us all together as she has year after year. And of course, the planning committee that put so much time and energy and coordination into this effort. So thank you, thank you, thank you. Also, someone, I think it was Todd Holloway, mentioned earlier that the Cascadia Rising 2022 exercise is coming up next June. So stay tuned on more opportunities to get involved in that at the community level. And just thank you for being involved within your local communities. That's really what's most important. As we all know, disasters start and end locally, and that's true with all the parts of the disaster, from preparedness to response to recovery and mitigation. So thank you for doing what you do. And this is one of the most rewarding parts of my team's job, getting to support all the community volunteers and teams, specifically CERT and other citizen core groups. A huge shout out to the speakers and the panelists. I feel like we covered a lot of information today, from COVID support and engagement of keeping volunteers engaged to virtual tips and tricks with Greg the past hour or so. And of course, disability integration and advocacy. So we could go on and on, but we covered a lot. Many of you may already know that our fearless leader, Paula Town, the Citizen Core and CERT coordinator for Washington State, is retiring at the end of June, and I am in denial still, but I think it's only fitting to take a moment and just give her more of a formal recognition and acknowledgement, because she really has been our fearless leader for the past many years, since way before I was in this program. And I and my team, we really value Paula. She has been a leader not just for Washington State, but across Region 10 and the country, really, when it comes to Citizen Core and CERT. I'm going to try not to get emotional, but Andy Burroughs even said it earlier that, you know, Region 10 has some of the most dedicated and invested volunteers across the country. And I think we have a lot of that too. I mean, it's true. And we also have Paula to thank for bringing us all together in a more structured environment, such as these events that happen annually. So with that, I just want to show that we have a certificate it's kind of, let me unblur my background because of course that makes it hard to see. So we have a certificate from FEMA Region 10 that I will be mailing to Paula, and it is signed by the acting regional administrator, and it says, Certificate of Appreciation. Thank you for your outstanding support, leadership, and dedication to the Citizen Corps and CERT programs throughout Washington State and Region 10. Your immense contributions to Citizen Corps and CERT have helped bring communities together to build a culture of preparedness and resilience. Thank you for your tireless efforts and best wishes in your retirement. To Paula Town on this day of the 21st of May, 2021. So we still have more than a month while Paula is formally in her role. I know she'll still be involved as a volunteer and as a colleague and friend. So, but just please take a minute and give Paula a round of applause, everyone. Thank you so much.
Thank you. That was sweet. I want to mention, yes, I am retiring the end of June. There is a job posting for the position. So if you're interested, get your applications in. Just want to remind you too that we do have not remind you, to let you know that we are planning at this point to hold the Northwest Citizen Corps Expo this year in person, God willing, COVID willing, the 20th and 21st of August at Renton Technical College. So that's in the works sort of as we speak. Again, it's not something we can easily do virtually, but we will plan on doing it an in-person if we can, if we're allowed to congregate at that time. And hopefully a lot of you will be able to be there. So again, I think we have the planning committee showing, and then if you want to show through the rest of the slides, John, real quick for our presenters, and you will get copies of the presentation. Everybody who is here will get a copy of it, and probably those who register as well. I had not planned on giving certificates, but we've had a request, so I think it might not be a bad idea that I can put together a certificate of participation in the event today. So again, I can't do it without you. I mean, you know, a leader is only as good as all the people that fall under them. So thank you. And I'm going to give you back about 20 minutes or 10 minutes, 15 minutes of your day left, and have a wonderful afternoon. Thank you and a great weekend.